Hey guys, tonight we slip back into the haze of medieval Europe. Imagine the door of a tavern creaking open and a wall of smoky air rushing out to meet you. The light inside is dim, flickering from candles stuck in iron sconces, and the smell hits you like a donkey cart full of wet hay. Ale, sweat, herbs, roasting meat, and just a hint of something that might be last week's spilled cider turning sour in the rushes on the floor. You take a step in, the wooden planks creak beneath your boots, and suddenly you're part of the crowd. You can almost hear the hum of chatter, a lute strumming lazily in the corner, and the occasional cheer when someone manages to down their mug in one heroic gulp. Tankards are being slammed on heavy oak tables, froth spilling over the rims, and everyone's faces are already flushed. You can smell the malt in the air, thick and sweet. Ale in the Middle Ages wasn't like your modern light beer. It was thicker, breadier, and strong enough that if you drank too much, you'd start seeing your neighbour's cow wink at you from across the room. And trust me, you probably won't survive this night without at least one questionable decision. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your seat at the tavern is just a worn stool pushed up to a sticky table. The ale you're given is lukewarm, it almost always is, and brewed in someone's home earlier this week. Brewing wasn't just industry back then, it was survival. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so ale doubled as both hydration and mood booster. And unlike modern beer, it wasn't carbonated. Instead, you're gulping something closer to a liquid loaf of bread. If you're lucky, it has a tangy edge from the herbs tossed in to mask strange flavours. If you're unlucky, well, let's just say a few more mugs and you won't notice. Here's the mainstream fact for tonight. Most medieval people consumed ale daily, from peasants to nobles. Children too often drank small ale, a weaker version, because it was safer than water. Historians still argue whether the average medieval villager was basically tipsy from dawn to dusk, or if their tolerance was just so high that a gallon of ale barely made them blink. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Taverns doubled as early social media. They weren't just about getting drunk, they were places where news was shared, contracts made, and the occasional duel started after someone accused someone else's sheep of trespassing. Medieval court records are stuffed with cases of alehouse brawls that began with a spilled drink and ended with someone swearing eternal vengeance over a chicken. You take another gulp, and the warmth spreads through your belly, a soft burn in your throat. A man at the next table leans too close, his breath thick with onions, and swears the tavern's brew is so potent it could make a bishop dance naked on the altar. You laugh, but part of you wonders if after another 3 mugs you might be joining him. The ceiling is low, beams blackened by tustuk smoke, and the air thick enough to make you cough. It's not just tobacco smoke either. That won't hit Europe for another couple of centuries. This haze is from tallow candles, hearth fires, and the steamy exhalations of 100 bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. The fire pit in the centre roars, spitting sparks, adding to the sense that the whole room is just one giant cauldron of humanity slowly boiling an ale. And as the night wears on, the tavern begins to hum differently. The lute strikes up a faster tune, mugs slam harder, and the voices rise. Somewhere, someone's singing a ballad about Robin Hood, though it's hard to tell if the lyrics are about the outlaw or just a local miller who owes money. In that moment, you can feel the pulse of medieval nightlife. This is their version of a nightclub, their escape from grinding labour, their way of chasing a different state of mind after a day of toil in muddy fields. And you, sitting there, mug in hand, are just beginning to feel that fuzziness creep in behind your eyes. The truth is, people in the Middle Ages weren't strangers to the idea of altering their perception. Whether it was through strong ale, honey wine, or stranger herbs, we'll meet soon. The tavern was just the first doorway into that altered world. And tonight, you've walked straight through it. The mug in your hand is heavy, carved wood bound with iron hoops, and the froth clings to your lips as you drink. You wipe it away with the back of your sleeve, though the sleeve was already stained long before you got here. Tonight's ale is thick, darker than the last, and it sits in your stomach like a loaf of barley bread. That's the thing, you're not just drinking, you're eating in liquid form. For most medieval folk, ale wasn't a luxury. It was sustenance. It filled bellies that rarely saw meat, and the calories kept you going through hard labour. Imagine having a drink that feels like swallowing an entire sandwich with each gulp. That's why ale was stronger than bread. It was food, hydration, and mood lifter in one frothy package. The miller in the corner swears he drinks 4 quarts before sunrise, and you believe him. Small ale, weak, low in alcohol, was breakfast for children, field hands, even Lord nuns. The stronger stuff, though, the kind in your mug now, could knock you sideways if you weren't careful. Historians still argue whether medieval people were perpetually buzzed, or whether their iron stomachs built up a tolerance so fierce that only a cask or two could topple them. The surviving records do show this. People brewed at home constantly, every few days, because ale spoiled fast. There was no refrigeration, no neat bottles with twist caps. You drank it fresh, cloudy, often with chunks floating around, and if it tasted odd, you just shrugged and drank faster before it turned worse. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some villages used ale as rent. Imagine paying your landlord not in coins but in gallons of foamy brew. In fact, ale was so woven into life that certain monasteries and lords expected it as tax. You can practically picture a cart rolling up to the manor house, barrels creaking under the weight, and the steward tapping one to make sure it wasn't watered down. And yes, tavern keepers got in trouble for exactly that, cheating by diluting their ale. Medieval court rolls often show fines against landlords who thought they could stretch profits by adding too much water. Nobody wanted diet ale. You take another sip and the room wobbles just slightly. A man next to you insists that too much ale will make your belly as round as St. Nicholas's smile, and you don't doubt it. Ale was full of starches and sugars. It filled out more bellies than modern bread. And here's the scholarly debate. Some argue that medieval peasants lived healthier lives because ale gave them safer hydration, while others point out the long-term effects of near-constant alcohol consumption. You'd probably need another mug or 3 before you could settle that debate, but you're leaning toward they were mostly tipsy. The tavern's heat grows heavier, the smell of malt thickens the air, and the candles are dripping faster, wax pooling onto wooden shelves. Somewhere in the corner a dice game turns loud, voices raised, and suddenly a fist slams the table. It's no surprise, alcohol and gambling make a dangerous pair. Alehouses were often scolded by the moralists for being dens of sin, places where good men turned reckless and pious women frowned. But they were also where songs were made, contracts signed and travellers welcomed. In the Middle Ages, the alehouse was your Wi-Fi hub, your town square, your therapist's couch, and your worst decision-making factory, all in one smoky room. You can almost taste the grain lingering on your tongue, bitter yet sweet. The drink has no fizz, no sparkle, it's more porridge than pilsner. But as your head warms and your shoulders loosen, you understand why people loved it. Life was brutal, and ale softened the edges. A day of bending over fields, swinging scythes, or carrying stone seemed easier to face knowing that by evening there was a stool, a mug, and the chance to feel pleasantly lighter than the mud clinging to your boots. And so, as the lute player changes tune and someone stumbles near you with a sloshing pitcher, you realise bread fills the belly, but ale fills the spirit. Tonight, you're living proof of that balance, the line between nourishment and intoxication blurring with every sip. The tavern door creaks open again, but this time it isn't another muddy farmer stumbling in. A pair of monks step across the threshold, their brown wool habits brushing the rushes scattered on the floor. The chatter softens for just a moment, because everyone knows these men carry not just the word of God, but also the best brew recipes in town. Cloisters weren't only for prayer, they were laboratories of fermentation, perfecting ales and beers that would echo down through centuries. You raise your mug in greeting, and they nod with solemn eyes, though you notice the one on the left is already eyeing the ale cask like a thirsty pilgrim. Here's the mainstream fact. Monastic brewing in the Middle Ages was legendary. Monks had access to resources, stability and knowledge that peasants didn't. They meticulously documented their brewing methods, experimented with herbs, and refined fermentation until they created something smoother, tastier and safer. In fact, many of the European beer traditions still trace their roots back to Benedictine and Cistercian abbeys. That glass of Trappist ale you might sip today is a direct descendant of the foamy mugs being poured in this very scene. You take a sip, and the difference is obvious. Where the villagers' ale was thick and inconsistent, this monk's brew is clear, balanced, and surprisingly refreshing. It's not just drink, it's a crafted experience. They even pioneered the use of hops, those bitter blossoms that extend shelf life and add that tangy bite. Without hops, ale spoiled quickly. With hops, it could travel, be stored, and even exported. That's why some historians argue that monastic brewers didn't just quench thirst, they quietly shaped Europe's economy. And now for the quirky tidbit. Monks weren't shy about drinking their own work. Records suggest they had daily rations that would put a frat house to shame, sometimes up to 5 litres per monk per day. Liquid bread, they called it, and they justified it as nourishment during fasting. You can almost hear them chuckle between psalms. Yes, Brother Thomas, we are fasting from food, but no one said anything about the beer barrel. Still, historians debate just how holy this practice was. Was it genuinely about survival during fasting, or was it an ecclesiastical loophole to keep spirits high, literally? Some say the monks were simply practical, others accuse them of enjoying loopholes far too much. Either way, the tradition stuck, and the faithful of every village gladly lined up when monks sold their surplus to the public. As you drink, you notice the tavern's atmosphere changing. With the monks present, people seem almost reverent, as though this brew is different, safer, blessed in some way. The lute player slows his tempo, the dice game pauses, and for a brief moment, this smoky, rowdy room feels like a sacred hall of communion. Everyone united by the froth in their cups. Your neighbour whispers a rumour that monks once brewed an ale so strong it made an entire group of pilgrims collapse on the roadside after only a few cups. Was it miracle or menace? Hard to tell. But one thing is certain. Monastic beer was both spiritual practice and survival tool, fueling prayer and profit alike. The monk raises his own mug now, blessing the room with a soft Latin chant, though the corners of his lips twitch with a smile. You clink your wooden tankard against his polished ceramic one, and in that moment, you're part of a 1,000-year-old ritual, half sacred, half sinful, and entirely intoxicating. The tavern grows louder, warmer, and now the smell shifts. Alongside the thick molten sweat, you catch a new sweetness, honey. A fresh pitcher is set down, golden liquid sloshing inside, and the crowd cheers. Mead has arrived, and suddenly the gossip in the air thickens like bees around a hive. You lift your cup, and the first sip is a shock compared to the heavy breadiness of ale. It's lighter, smoother, tinged with floral notes that make you think of Springfields. Mead, wine made from honey, was ancient even in the Middle Ages, a drink tied to gods, warriors, and weddings. You can almost feel the myth wrapping around your tongue with each swallow. People whisper it brings courage, warmth, and sometimes love. Historians still argue whether mead was truly the drink of kings, or more of a rustic indulgence that villagers brewed in backyard crocks. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Nobles drank refined versions with imported spices, while peasants made their own sticky, cloudy brews that fizzed and soured in unpredictable ways. Tonight, though, it's enough to set tongues wagging. The woman across the table laughs too loudly, cheeks red from the sweetness, and leans close to whisper secrets about the reeve. A shepherd starts singing a half-finished ballad about a lost sheep and a very patient innkeeper. Gossip swirls with the mead, because honey wine doesn't just lubricate throats, it loosens thoughts. Here's the mainstream fact: mead was widely associated with celebrations. In Norse and Anglo-Saxon traditions, it was drunk at feasts, weddings, and warrior halls. Even the word honeymoon comes from the custom of newlyweds drinking mead for a full moon cycle after marriage, supposedly to boost fertility. Imagine starting your marriage with 30 days of sticky hangovers. Romantic, right? And the quirky tidbits. Some recipes for medieval mead called for tossing in herbs or even raw meat scraps to strengthen the ferment. You glance at your cup, suddenly less eager to gulp. If you smell a faint tang of rosemary, or worse, bacon, it might not be your imagination. A debate rises in this corner. Is this mead truly stronger than ale, or does its sweetness simply trick you into drinking more? The scholars haven't settled it either, arguing over how potent medieval mead could get without modern distillation. But in this tavern, the answer is clear, strong enough to make a baker declare undying love to the smith's daughter, even while the smith glowers 2 feet away. The laughter rises with the pitch of the lute, and the honey wine warms you in a way that's more than just alcoholic. It's a communal warmth, sticky and golden, a sweetness that makes enemies forgive and lovers forget common sense. And you, lost in the glow, realise that gossip and song are just as intoxicating as the mead itself. The tavern settles into a softer rhythm now, the heavy laughter giving way to murmurs as the monks slip out and the mead jugs run dry. A different scent curls through the air, earthy, pungent, not unlike hemp rope left in the rain. You glance toward the hearth and notice a few friars huddled close, their robes lifted just enough to reveal bundles of green leaves drying in the smoke. At first, you assume it's just for rope making, but the sly smiles and half-lidded eyes suggest otherwise. Cannabis had many faces in the Middle Ages. On the one hand, it was utterly ordinary. Hemp fibres twisted into ropes, woven into cloth, even pressed into oil. Monasteries grew it alongside onions and beans, no stranger than a cabbage patch. But every so often someone nibbled or brewed the leaves in ways less about textiles and more about visions. Historians still argue whether cannabis was genuinely used recreationally in medieval Europe, or if it remained mainly industrial. Evidence exists of medical texts mentioning cannabum as a pain reliever, though whether peasants experimented beyond that remains debate. Still, in this smoky room, the monks look far too relaxed to be planning their next batch of rope. Here's the mainstream fact. Hemp was cultivated widely across Europe, prized for its durability. Medieval sailors depended on hemp ropes and sails, and some towns even required households to grow it. Without hemp, trade ships couldn't cross seas, and without trade ships, well, your cup of spiced wine later in this story wouldn't exist. Now the quirky tidbit. Some old herbals suggest cannabis seeds were roasted and eaten like nuts. Imagine a medieval snack stand at a fair, candied hemp seeds sold next to honey cakes. You can almost hear a friar crunching them now, muttering that it's strictly for health, though his grin betrays him. A man beside you leans in and whispers that certain monasteries brewed special teas for treating melancholy, though the effect was often more laughter than solemnity. Was it medicine, or just a loophole like the monks' beer rations? No one can say for sure. The fire crackles, shadows stretch across the rafters, and you begin to notice a haze thicker than just candle smoke. It clings to your skin, makes your thoughts wander. A lute string twangs out of tune, and suddenly it seems hilarious, though you can't explain why. The room feels slower, warmer, more forgiving. Historians still debate whether cannabis truly shifted medieval consciousness, or whether those who wrote about it exaggerated its powers. But tonight, as your mug cools in your hands and the friars laugh softly at jokes no one else heard, you feel a ripple of something beyond ordinary drink, a glimpse of how even the most pious gardens might have harboured a secret or two. The tavern grows quiet as a new visitor arrives. Not a rowdy farmer or cheeky friar this time, but an apothecary carrying a leather pouch that smells of earth and sweetness. He settles by the fire, loosens the drawstrings, and suddenly the air is filled with a sharper, headier scent. Inside the pouch are poppy pods dried and potent, their milky sap pressed into tiny lumps of opium. In a world of constant injury, toothaches, and childbirth without anaesthesia, this plant was both miracle and menace. Here's the mainstream fact. Poppies were grown widely for medicine, and medieval doctors, often monks or learned herbalists, prescribed preparations from them to dull pain. In fact, one famous medical text, the Hortus Sanitatis of the 15th century, recommended poppy for everything from headaches to insomnia. In strong enough doses, it could even knock a patient unconscious, crude form of anaesthesia for surgery. Without it, many wouldn't have survived the brutality of medieval medicine. You watch as the apothecary crumbles a piece into a clay cup of hot wine. The liquid swirls dark, and when he hands it to a coughing mason, the man drinks deeply, sighs, and slumps back as if floating. His breathing steadies, his face loosens, and the pain that twisted his brow seems to drift away. It's oddly peaceful, almost holy, except you know the truth. That peace can become a prison. The quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers claimed opium could send people into dreamscapes where they saw angels or demons. Picture a peasant insisting he'd spoken to St. Michael himself, only for his neighbours to point out he'd just swallowed too much poppy wine. It became hard to separate vision from overdose. Historians still argue whether opium was widely accessible or reserved mainly for the wealthy and ill. Some evidence suggests it travelled with spice caravans, expensive and rare. Others argue it filtered down into the villages through cunning healers who grew poppies secretly in gardens, hidden among cabbages and marigolds. Was it a common comfort or an elite luxury? The debate continues like smoke curling above a tavern fire. The apothecary lowers his voice, telling the story of a knight wounded in battle, who survived only because he was dosed into unconsciousness, while surgeons stitched him by candlelight. The knight later claimed he dreamt of paradise, angels singing and rivers of milk and honey. The apothecary only shrugs. Was it divine revelation, or simply too much opium in mulled wine? You sip your ale and feel the weight of the room shift. Some patrons snore against the wall, Some whisper prayers, and others watch the apothecary with wary eyes. Pain relief, visions, or dangerous sleep, Poppy offered it all. In the glow of firelight, you realise the line between medicine and intoxication was thinner than a poppy petal. The tavern's laughter fades as an older woman enters, her cloak smelling faintly of herbs and wood smoke. She sets down a bundle wrapped in linen, and when she unties it, the room shifts with curiosity and a little fear. Inside are jars of strange unguents, greenish, brownish, some with the faint shimmer of fat mixed with crushed leaves. You've stumbled into the whispered world of witches' ointments, those infamous concoctions said to send bodies flying and minds soaring. Here's the mainstream fact. Records from the late Middle Ages describe ointments made from plants like henbane, belladonna, and datura, hallucinogens capable of inducing vivid visions, body numbness, and sensations of flight. Trials and inquisitions often mentioned suspects confessing, sometimes under torture, that they rubbed these brews on their skin or even broomsticks. That's where the stereotype of witches flying takes its roots, chemistry meeting folklore in a swirl of paranoia. The woman takes a dab of salve on her finger and smears it along her arm. Within minutes her eyelids flutter, and she hums softly as if half asleep, half somewhere else. Around you, villagers shuffle uneasily. Is she communing with spirits, or simply riding a wave of alkaloids? Historians still argue whether these ointments were genuinely used for mystical experience or whether inquisitors exaggerated stories to justify persecution. Some scholars think the recipes worked, others say it was all rumour inflated by fear of female healers. Now the quirky tidbit, some of these ointments were so greasy they had to be applied with carved wooden sticks, which might explain the infamous broom imagery. Imagine villagers whispering she's flying through the night sky, when in reality she was in her cottage, woozy, smearing ointment with the nearest stick. A far less glamorous kind of witchcraft. You watch her sway, her lips parting to murmur about a forest full of dancing lights, voices calling her by name. The men at the table cross themselves nervously, the friar mutters about demons, but you sense a different truth. Whether spirit world or hallucination, she's touched something beyond the smoke and ale. The fire snaps, someone coughs, and the room exhales relief when she finally wipes her arm clean. Her eyes open, hazy but calm, as if she's walked a path no one else can see. Tonight you realise the medieval world wasn't just about dulling pain or chasing drunken laughter. Sometimes it was about slipping into another reality altogether, broomstick or not. The woman's jars are packed away, but the tavern doesn't settle. Instead, another hush falls when a young man drags in something stranger than any ointment. A mandrake root, thick and knotted, with twisted limbs that almost resemble a tiny shriveled human. The sight alone makes drinkers cross themselves, for everyone knows the legends. Mandrakes scream when pulled from the earth, a sound so deadly it can kill. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval herbals described mandrake as both powerful medicine and dangerous poison. Physicians believed it could act as an anaesthetic, helping patients sleep through surgery or easing unbearable pain. The Herbarium Apuleius mentions it as early as the 11th century, prescribing small doses for everything from gout to melancholy. But its power was feared too much, and it could stop your heart. The young man sets it on the table, and someone whispers a prayer. You lean closer, and sure enough, the gnarled root looks unsettlingly like a doll. Arms, legs, even what could be a face. No wonder stories clung to it. Some claimed you had to tie a hungry dog to the root and let the beast yank it free, dying instantly from the scream so its master could survive. Historians still argue whether these tales were sincere belief or exaggerated folklore. After all, mandrakes do contain hallucinogenic alkaloids, so maybe the stories sprang from confused experiences after chewing the root. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some households carved mandrakes into little magical men, dressed in tiny clothes, keeping them in boxes, feeding them milk or even drops of blood. The belief was that a happy mandrake brought wealth and luck. Picture a medieval peasant sneaking milk to a plant root, scolding it like a child when the harvest failed. The man holding the mandrake insists he's used it in love charms. Sliced thin, mixed with wine, whispered over by candlelight. Did it work? The girl he pursued married a different man, but he swears she still stares longingly whenever he sings. Maybe the mandrake helped, or maybe that's just the wine talking. As the root passes from hand to hand, you sense both fascination and fear. Some refuse to touch it, muttering that demons live in its veins. Others joke nervously, calling it the drunken doll. You set it back down gently, unsure whether to laugh or cross yourself. The mandrake sits on the table, silent now, but in your ears you almost imagine a faint echo of a scream. Whether from the root or from the fears of generations before you, you can't quite tell. The mandrake is tucked away, but your head is still humming from the whispers about its scream. You rub your temples, trying to shake off the feeling that something small and gnarled is watching you from the shadows. The tavern door swings open once more, letting in a gust of cold night air and the clatter of boots. This time it's sailors, broad-shouldered, smelling of tar and salt. They carry sacks slung over their backs, heavy with something that clinks like shells or rattles like beans. They stomp across the room, grinning, and toss their bundles onto the table with a flourish. When they untie the cords, the crowd gasps. Outspill nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, spice is so sharp and fragrant they seem to slice through the smoke itself. At once, the tavern fills with questions. How far have you sailed? What are those worth? Can they cure my cough? The sailors laugh, knowing full well these little bundles of spice could be worth a farmer's entire year of labour. Tonight, though, they're not here to sell to merchants. They're here to brag, boast, and inevitably share what happens when sailors experiment with exotic plants far from home. You lean closer, inhaling the heady scent. Cloves prickle the nose, nutmeg is warm and earthy, cinnamon sweet. To you, it's just kitchen spice. But in medieval Europe, these were more than flavour. They were medicine, aphrodisiac, sometimes even drug. Historians still argue whether people truly experienced hallucinatory effects from overdosing on nutmeg, or whether sailors spun tall tales to impress wide-eyed villagers. Modern science confirms that too much nutmeg can cause dizziness, nausea, and hallucinations. Imagine stumbling through the streets convinced the Virgin Mary just winked at you from a stained glass window, all because you grated too much nutmeg into your stew. Here's your mainstream fact. The spice trade in the Middle Ages was so profitable, wars were fought over it. Venice grew rich controlling routes, while Arab traders guarded their monopolies fiercely. To sprinkle nutmeg on your food was to show off wealth and status. A noble could impress guests simply by serving spiced wine. It wasn't just flavour, it was power, prestige, and sometimes intoxication. The quirky tidbit? Sailors told stories of nutmeg feasts gone wrong. A crewman might dare another to swallow a spoonful whole, and within hours the poor fool would be sweating, shaking, and claiming he saw sea monsters climbing over the gunwales. The captain's log would simply note, discipline disturbed. You picture it now, a half-delirious sailor clinging to the mast, shouting that Poseidon himself is knocking at the hull, while his mates laugh and steal his ration of rum. Back in the tavern, one sailor tips a pinch of spice into his ale and stirs. He takes a sip, smacks his lips, and declares it the drink of emperors, a bold claim for a smoky alehouse miles from the nearest palace. Yet when you sip from his cup, the taste is sharp, fiery, almost less electric. The room feels warmer, the lute sounds brighter, and for a moment you almost believe the stories. This is no ordinary ale, this is liquid treasure. The scholarly debate swirls as loudly as the tavern gossip. Did spices genuinely alter medieval consciousness, or was it simply the sheer cost that gave them an aura of magic? Some argue peasants never tasted enough to know. Others suggest that in port cities and along trade routes, people experimented freely, grinding nutmeg into their drinks, mixing cinnamon into mead, chewing cloves until their tongues tingled. The sailors, fueled by laughter and drink, begin boasting of stranger things. They describe distant islands where the air smells permanently of spice, where locals chew leaves that make them talk to spirits, where merchants guard trees as though they bore gold instead of bark. You listen, eyes wide, knowing full well sailors exaggerate, but also sensing truth hidden in their rambling tales. One pulls from his pocket a small bundle wrapped in cloth, dried leaves, brown and brittle. He winks and says it came from a caravan far to the east. When burned, he claims, the smoke makes men bold, women beautiful, and time itself bend like a sail in the wind. He tosses a leaf into the fire, and the tavern erupts in nervous laughter as a sweet, strange smoke curls into the rafters. Maybe it's just the spice, maybe it's just the suggestion, but the crowd leans closer, voices softer, as though waiting for a vision. You blink. The firelight seems to ripple. The carved beams above twist slightly, like ship's masts in a storm. You shake your head, and the illusion fades, but you can't deny the shift in atmosphere. Sailors grin, villagers whisper, and suddenly everyone believes the tavern has become a little less earthbound, a little more touched by distant seas and hidden markets. Someone strums the lute, and the tune slides off key in a way that feels deliberate, enchanting. A woman beside you insists she sees tiny figures dancing in the smoke, nutmeg fairies giggling among the sparks. Is it real? Is it drunkenness? Historians still argue whether medieval people truly hallucinated from spice overdoses, or whether gossip inflated a few rare incidents into legend. The sailors don't care. They drink deep, sing loud, and shout bawdy songs about mermaids with cinnamon-scented hair. You laugh, not entirely convinced they're wrong. The tavern is thick with spice now, your tongue tingling, your head light. The world feels brighter, sharper, and for a moment you wonder if you've crossed some invisible line, no longer just drunk, but travelling with sailors on winds you can't feel. The room spins slightly, but not unpleasantly. You watch the sailors dance on benches, stomping their boots so hard the ale sloshes in mugs. Their songs are half in their own tongue, half nonsense invented on the spot. Yet everyone joins in. The spices have loosened the room, made laughter quicker, touches bolder, eyes brighter. You feel yourself swept along, caught in the current of foreign lands and fragrant dreams. You lean back, letting the warmth of the fire and the buzz of spice-laden ale wash over you. Somewhere deep in your chest you know the truth. Medieval Europe may have been muddy fields and cold stone walls, but through sailors and spice the people touched another world. Distant, intoxicating, and just a little unreal. The spice smoke lingers in your hair as the sailors tumble out into the night, their laughter echoing down the muddy lane. You're left blinking at the rafters, still half convinced the beams swayed like shipmasts. But before you can steady your thoughts, the tavern door swings wide again. A troop of villagers bursts in, baskets in hand, dripping with juice. Apples, pears, plums, whatever fruit they could scavenge from orchards and hedgerows spill across the floor. Their faces are flushed not just from the cold, but from anticipation. Tonight isn't about ale or mead or foreign spice. Tonight is about fermented fruit, about the wild, bubbling concoctions that transform rotten harvests into dizzy festivals. They slam down a wooden cask, and the bung pops with a squelch. The air fills with a sharp tang of cider so sour it makes your tongue curl just from the smell. This isn't your crisp, bottled, modern cider. It's cloudy, half-fermented, the kind that could taste heavenly in one sip and like vinegar in the next. And no one cares. Cups are filled, pitchers passed, and within minutes the room has shifted from weary tavern to raucous fairground. You take a gulp. It's sweet at first, then tart, then burning down your throat with a strange fizz that wasn't meant to be there. Your stomach flips, but your head spins pleasantly, and suddenly the lute player's clumsy strumming sounds like the finest court performance. This is the magic of fruit wine. It makes the ordinary shine brighter, makes the bleakest hall feel like a midsummer feast. Here's the mainstream fact. Villagers across Europe made cider and perry, pear wine, wherever orchards grew. In some regions, especially Normandy and England, cider rivaled ale as the common drink. Records show peasants storing barrels in cool cellars, tapping them for feasts and saints' days. The stuff was unpredictable, sometimes safe, sometimes so strong it could fell an ox, but it was part of rural life, woven into the cycle of seasons. Now the quirky tidbit. One German chronicle from the 14th century describes a village feast where a barrel of over-fermented cider exploded, showering guests in sticky foam. Instead of panicking, they laughed, scooped handfuls off the floor, and carried on drinking. You picture it now, peasants sliding across cider-soaked planks, slipping like children convinced it was divine blessing rather than brewing accident. Historians still argue whether fruit wines were seen as peasants' fare or as noble indulgence. Some accounts suggest nobles spiced theirs with sugar and saffron, turning humble cider into golden luxury. Others point to village records where the poor relied on whatever fruit they could scrounge, fermenting it into rough drink to survive winter. The truth is likely both. Cider belonged to everyone, but its flavour shifted with class and purse. The tavern begins to thrum differently under cider's sway. Ale brings warmth, mead brings sweetness, spice brings fire, but cider brings chaos. A man leaps onto the table, balancing a cup in each hand, declaring himself King of Apples. The crowd cheers, tossing peels at him like confetti. Women dance in circles, skirts twirling, their laughter rising higher than the lute. Children too young for strong drink run about gnawing on fruit cores, drunk on sugar and the contagious mood. You sip again, and the room tilts. The cider has a sharpness, a wildness, fermentation untamed. It doesn't lull like ale or soothe like mead. It jolts. Your heart races, your cheeks flush, and your mind flickers with images. Apple blossoms swirling like snow, a pear tree bending under the weight of golden fruit, villagers dancing around bonfires crowned with wreaths. Whether these visions come from the cider or the frenzy of the crowd, you can't tell. The King of Apples slams his cup down and declares judgment. Anyone who refuses another drink must wear the crown of shame. From somewhere, a basket of rotten pears appears, and soon the unlucky few are adorned with squishy fruit hats, dripping juice down their faces. The tavern roars with laughter, cider splashing onto the floor in sticky puddles. And here's the deeper truth. Festivals of fermented fruit were more than just excuses to get drunk. They were safety valves, moments when the strict order of medieval life loosened. Lords became fools, fools became kings, and peasants danced like nobles. These nights blurred class, blurred gender, blurred sense itself. For a few hours, life's harsh edges dissolved in apple froth. The lute shifts into a faster rhythm, the stamping of feet becomes thunder, and the whole tavern shakes with movement. You're pulled into the dance, hand in hand with strangers, spinning until the room blurs. Someone pours cider straight into your mouth mid-spin, and you choke and laugh at once, juice running down your chin. The scholarly debate surfaces again. Were these festivals tolerated by church and crown or quietly condemned? Some sermons rail against drunken orchard feasts, calling them pagan remnants. Others suggest priests joined in, mugs in hand, preaching moderation, only after the barrel ran dry. The line between sin and celebration was as cloudy as the cider itself. As the night rages, the cask grows lighter, the floor stickier, the air sweeter. You feel yourself slipping into the rhythm, cider coursing through your veins like liquid sunlight. Around you, peasants and sailors, monks and merchants, women and men, all sway together, voices lifted in a single chorus. Drink, dance, forget. You collapse onto a bench, breathless, heart pounding. The cider still fizzes in your blood, and you realise this is more than drunkenness. This is collective intoxication, a whole village's spirit distilled into one wild night. And as you watch the dancers whirl in the smoky glow, you know, fermented fruit didn't just preserve harvests, it preserved joy. The tavern floor is sticky with cider, and the laughter of the Apple King still echoes faintly as the dancers collapse in heaps. For a moment, the air feels heavy, exhausted. Then from the far end of the room, a hooded figure strikes a flint, lights a small brazier, and mutters words that sound more like alchemy than prayer. A faint metallic tang drifts upward. Sulphur, mercury, perhaps something stranger. And suddenly the weary room sharpens into alertness. You lean forward, drawn by the eerie glow of glass vessels and bubbling concoctions. Tonight you've stumbled into the world of alchemists, where intoxication isn't a happy accident but a deliberate path to visions. The hood is thrown back, revealing a scholar's face pale and lined from candlelight vigils. He holds up a vial that shimmers green in the firelight, then uncorks it with a hiss. The smell is sharp enough to sting your eyes. A few drops fall into a cup of heated wine, fizzing as though alive. The alchemist raises it in toast, drinks, and then closes his eyes. His lips move soundlessly, his breath shallow, his body trembling as though some revelation has seized him. Here's the mainstream fact. Alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold. In the Middle Ages, alchemists also experimented with distillation, fermentation, and the manipulation of substances that bordered on pharmacology. They discovered ways to concentrate alcohol, what they called aqua vitae, the water of life, which was stronger, sharper, and far more intoxicating than ale or mead. Early distillates could easily knock a man flat after a single cup. The quirky tidbit? Some alchemists claimed their fumes gave them visions of angels or demons. In one 13th century manuscript, an anonymous monk describes inhaling vapours during distillation and seeing wheels of fire turning above his head. Was it a divine revelation or simply mercury poisoning? Historians still argue whether these ecstatic visions were genuine mystical experiences or hallucinations brought on by toxic exposure. The alchemist in front of you begins to mutter about hidden truths, claiming he sees the structure of the cosmos unfolding in spirals of light. The villagers lean in, half awed, half amused. A blacksmith whispers that the man once brewed a potion so strong it made an entire choir of novices giggle uncontrollably during Mass. You can almost picture the scene. boys wheezing with laughter while the abbot scowls, convinced the devil himself had seized them. You take a cautious sip from a cup offered your way. The liquid burns like fire, sharper than any ale, leaving your throat raw and your chest aflame. Your head spins almost instantly. The lute's plucking slows, then quickens as if the sound itself can't decide what tempo to keep. Shadows along the walls ripple strangely, and for a moment you could swear the carved saints above the fireplace are leaning forward watching. The alchemist smiles knowingly as though he shares your vision. He holds up a piece of chalk and draws a circle on the table, mumbling about the balance of elements. He insists this new spirit, clear, potent, alive, isn't just a drink. It's a key to deeper knowledge, to transformation, to transcending ordinary flesh. You're not sure if he means enlightenment or just the kind of dizziness that makes you fall face first into your neighbour's lap. The scholarly debate lingers. Did medieval alchemists truly believe in their visions, or were they opportunists selling intoxication as mysticism? Some say their notebooks are filled with genuine spiritual quests. Others argue they were half scientists, half showmen. Either way, their experiments changed the history of drink. Distillation would eventually lead to brandy, whiskey, and every spirit that burns down throats today. Tonight, you're tasting the dawn of that fiery lineage. Around you, the tavern shifts once more. Some laugh at the scholar's theatrics. Others close their eyes, chasing their own visions in the smoke. You clutch your cup, its liquid still burning on your tongue, and realise you're not just drunk. You're part of an experiment, a ritual, a fragile step between chemistry and magic. The fire sputters, the brazier hisses, and for a heartbeat the room feels suspended, half in this world, half in another. Then the alchemist slams his empty cup on the table, declares the work complete, and collapses in a heap of robes. The crowd erupts in applause, whether for the show or for the chance to breathe clean air again. You wipe your eyes, still stinging, and sit back. The tavern has grown stranger with each drink, each herb, each experiment. Ale, mead, cider, spice, poppies, mandrakes, ointments, and now this, vision summoned from fumes. You wonder what could possibly come next, and whether your head will survive it. The tavern has become a theatre of transformations. First ale, then mead, then cider, then the fumes of alchemy, each drink, each smoke, each potion peeling back another layer of ordinary life. You lean against the table, your head buzzing like a hive, when a pair of shepherds enter, boots muddy, cloaks damp with evening mist. Their eyes are wild, their voices too loud, and when they throw down a basket, the tavern hushes. Inside, hidden beneath damp moss, are mushrooms, red-capped, speckled white, and others darker, more ordinary to the untrained eye. They've brought with them the whispers of the fields, the secret harvest that peasants insist lets them glimpse things others cannot see. They spread the fungi across the table, and at once the debates begin. Some mutter that these are food, nothing more. Others swear they've seen men stagger into woods, chew these caps, and return babbling about fairy circles and dancing lights. Historians still argue whether medieval people used hallucinogenic mushrooms deliberately, or whether such stories are just folklore folded into daily life. Church sermons thundered against eating of devil's bread, yet peasant tales are thick with stories of visions under the moon. Here's the mainstream fact. Fungi of many kinds were eaten in medieval Europe, both ordinary and extraordinary. Some were prized in cooking, others feared as poisonous. Manuals from the 13th century warn about toadstools that could bring madness or death, though they don't always distinguish between fatal poisoning and hallucinatory journeys. Without clear taxonomy, the same red cap could be a deadly curse in one village and a doorway to fairies in another. Now the quirky tidbit. One folktale from Wales describes shepherds eating strange mushrooms and swearing they danced with elves until dawn, only to wake in a ditch covered in mud and sheep dung. The elves, it seemed, had vanished with their sobriety. You can almost hear the tavern erupting in laughter at such a tale, even as a few faces glance nervously at the basket. The shepherds boast that they've eaten these caps many times, that they can walk into the other world and back again. They lift one mushroom high, break it in half, and toss the pieces into mugs of cider. The crowd gasps. Some rush forward eagerly, others back away, muttering prayers. You're caught in the middle, curiosity wrestling with caution. The cup passed your way smells earthy, sour, and faintly metallic. You lift it, sip, and the room begins to tilt. At first it's subtle. The lute sounds distant, then suddenly too close, as if the strings are vibrating inside your skull. The fire on the hearth flickers, Not yellow, but green, then blue, then every colour at once. The tavern beams ripple like waves, and faces stretch and twist, grinning too wide, eyes glinting like coins. You set the cup down, but it's too late. The mushrooms have already taken hold. The room dissolves. You're standing not in the tavern, but in a meadow under starlight. Circles of mushrooms glow faintly around you, and tiny figures dance within them, some with wings, some with long noses, all giggling in high, bell-like tones. One grabs your hand, tugs you into the circle, and suddenly your body feels light, your feet moving of their own accord. You spin, whirl, laugh, and the night sky blurs overhead like painted glass. Back in the tavern, or what you think is the tavern, someone has begun to sing, but the words come out backwards, a language you half recognise and half invent as you hear it. The shepherds grin knowingly, chewing their own mushrooms with stained teeth. They insist this is the fairy's gift, that the visions prove another world sits alongside this one, thin as a veil. Historians debate whether such visions were taken seriously or mocked as drunken folly. Some argue peasants believed firmly in fairies, that mushroom circles were proof of spirits dancing. Others suggest the visions were explained away as the devil's tricks, warnings to keep people sober. Yet the persistence of these stories across centuries suggests something powerful lay beneath them. Something that made ordinary villagers see extraordinary things. Your body wavers between laughter and unease. The fairies in your vision grow taller, stranger, their giggles sharper. The fire's crackle turns into whispers, the lute into 1,000 bees. You blink hard, grip the table, and the tavern swims back into focus. Sticky floor, smoky rafters, rowdy drinkers. Yet for a heartbeat longer, you swear you still hear bells ringing far away. The shepherds shrug, content. To them, this is a game, a ritual, a way to bridge the ordinary with the magical. To you, it's a reminder that medieval life was never entirely bound to mud and stone. Sometimes, with the help of mushrooms, it leapt into realms of myth. As you wipe your mouth, someone nudges you, chuckling, "Careful, friend, too many caps, and the fairies keep you forever." You laugh nervously, though part of you isn't sure it's a joke. The tavern is hushed again, though this silence feels different. Thicker, heavier. The shepherds slump in corners, some laughing, some twitching, their mushroom feast still swirling in their heads. You shake your own dizziness off with a gulp of stale ale, and just as the room steadies, the door bursts open with a crash. In stride a group of men draped in furs, their faces painted with streaks of ash, their eyes wild with a fire that isn't just from drink. Vikings, berserkers to be exact. The air seems to buckle around them, as if the room itself holds its breath. Their leader slams a horn onto the table, froth spilling, as he howls like a wolf. The sound rattles mugs and spines alike. His men beat their chests, some gnashing their teeth, others shuddering as though seized by unseen hands. They are preparing for war, and the brew they drink is no ordinary mead. They call it a gift from Odin, a potion that strips away fear and replaces it with fire. Tonight, you're about to witness what it meant to get high before a battle, when madness was not a curse but a weapon. You take the horn they offer, sniff and nearly gag. This isn't the golden, honey-sweet mead you tasted earlier. This one is bitter, sharp, spiked with herbs that twist the stomach. Some scholars suggest it contained henbane or bog myrtle, plants known to cause hallucinations and heightened aggression. The berserkers called it sacred, a way to shed their humanity and don the skin of beasts. Here's the mainstream fact. The word berserker comes from Old Norse, meaning bear shirt or bear shirt. These warriors fought in a trance-like fury, seemingly impervious to pain, tearing into enemies with animal strength. Contemporary sagas describe them biting their shields, foaming at the mouth and striking terror into entire armies. Historians still argue whether their frenzy came from drugs, ritual, psychological conditioning, or sheer myth. The quirky tidbit? Some accounts claim berserkers chewed fly agaric mushrooms, the same red and white caps that fueled fairy tales. Imagine a warband storming into battle high on the same fungus that made shepherds dance with elves. Others suggest henbane tea, which can cause delirium, tremors, and a sense of invincibility. Picture a warrior gulping bitter brew, then charging headlong into a shield wall, convinced he's become a bear. The tavern watches in awe as the men drink deeply, then begin to transform. Their breathing grows ragged, their eyes roll, and they pound the tables until mugs bounce and crash. One tears off his fur cloak and roars, muscles straining, veins bulging. Another gnaws at his shield rim until splinters bleed his gums. The lute player wisely stops, Even the drunkest peasants dare not laugh. You feel a chill despite the fire's heat. For a moment you believe they truly are possessed. Half man, half beast. Their frenzy is contagious, a storm that pulls you with it. Your pulse races, your fists clench, and you nearly shout with them before catching yourself. The air is thick with sweat, smoke, and something darker. The metallic tang of fear. Historians debate the purpose of this state. Was it purely psychological warfare, a performance designed to terrify enemies? Or was it a genuine altered state induced by herbs and ritual? Some scholars argue it was both, a chemical frenzy harnessed by belief. Whatever the truth, its power was undeniable. Armies broke, kings trembled, and the legend of berserkers endured long after their raids ended. The leader grabs your shoulder, eyes burning, and shoves the horn back into your hands. "Drink," he growls, "and fear no blade." You hesitate, but the room watches, and curiosity wins. The taste is foul, bitter, burning. Heat floods your chest. Your stomach knots, and your head swims. The room blurs, and for an instant you feel it. The pull of the beast. Your vision narrows, your muscles coil, and you imagine leaping over the table, teeth bared. You grip the bench, forcing yourself still. The berserkers howl louder, their frenzy peaking until they collapse suddenly, shuddering, their bodies spent. Steam rises off their skin as though they've burned from within. The tavern exhales, the spell broken, and slowly the villagers begin to murmur again. You sit trembling, the aftertaste of herbs still bitter on your tongue. Tonight you've seen what it means to get high, not for escape but for war. Mead mixed with madness, herbs mixed with rage. The Viking berserkers' brew turned men into monsters and fear into fuel. And though the frenzy fades, the memory lingers, sharp and unsettling, like the echo of a wolf's howl in the distance. The echoes of the berserkers' howls still rattle in your chest long after they've stormed out into the night. The tavern crowd sits stunned, gripping their mugs a little tighter, whispering prayers under their breath. You're left staring into the fire, the bitter taste of herbs lingering on your tongue, when the door creaks once more. This time it's not warriors or sailors or shepherds, but a line of weary pilgrims, their cloaks tattered, their boots caked in mud from weeks on the road. They shuffle in quietly, but they carry an air of reverence that hushes even the rowdiest drinkers. They place upon the counter small glass flasks filled with water, clear, still, almost ordinary. Yet the way they handle them with awe and trembling fingers tells you these are no ordinary draughts. They claim to have come from miraculous wells, springs blessed by saints, fountains said to heal wounds, cure sickness, and some whisper, bring visions. The tavern leans in close. After all, what's one more intoxicant in a night already heavy with smoke and spice? You're handed a flask. The water glints in the candlelight, and though it tastes plain on your tongue, within moments you feel a warmth spreading through you. Perhaps it's just the ale and mead and cider already swirling in your blood, but perhaps it's something more. The pilgrim beside you swears that after drinking from St. Winifred's well, he dreamt of angels walking across the hills of Wales, their voices like thunder softened by harp strings. Another insists the waters of Canterbury made her lame foot light as a feather. Here's the mainstream fact. Holy wells and miraculous springs dotted the medieval landscape. Pilgrims travelled miles to sip their waters or bathe in them, believing they carried divine power. Some wells were dedicated to saints, others to ancient pagan deities repurposed by the church. Healing was the most common promise, but stories of visions were not rare. People claimed to see saints, hear voices, or fall into ecstatic trances after drinking. Now the quirky tidbit, some so-called holy wells were suspiciously fortified with additives. Locals, eager to keep the legend alive, sometimes mixed herbs or strong spirits into the water to intensify the effect. Imagine a pilgrim stumbling home, swearing he had seen St. Peter himself, when in truth he'd just swallowed a splash of brandy hidden in the well. Historians still argue whether the visions at wells were divine, psychological, or chemically induced. Was it faith, suggestion, or spiked water? The debate remains as unsettled, like the rippling surface of the spring itself. As the pilgrims pass the flask, the tavern grows hushed. People sip reverently, whispering prayers, eyes closed as if waiting for revelation. Some sigh deeply, others mutter about tingling in their hands, a few giggle nervously. You swallow, and suddenly the fire seems brighter, the shadows deeper. For a heartbeat, you imagine you see a figure standing in the flames, tall-robed, face hidden by light. You blink and it's gone, just sparks rising into the chimney. Was it a vision or just cider fumes? The pilgrims sing softly, voices weaving into a hymn that makes the room feel like a chapel. Even the drunkest peasants bow their heads. In this moment, intoxication and devotion blur. The water may be plain, the vision's fleeting, but the atmosphere is charged with belief. The tavern feels less like a den of ale and more like a cathedral of smoke. And here's the deepest truth. In a world of sickness, pain and uncertainty, people needed miracles. Wells, springs, sacred waters, they offered hope, and sometimes hope was intoxicating enough. You placed the flask down, heart steadying. The berserkers sought frenzy, the sailors brought spit, the alchemist brewed visions, but the pilgrims offer something different. A gentle high, softer, rooted not in herbs or alcohol, but in faith itself. And as the hymn fades and the pilgrims settle with their flasks, you realise that for medieval people the line between miracle and intoxication was as thin as a ripple on holy water. The pilgrims' hymn fades into soft snores as they curl up by the hearth, their holy flasks cradled like treasures. The tavern exhales, returning to its familiar hum of voices and creaking wood. But before long, the door swings wide again, and this time it isn't saints or warriors who step inside, it's peasants, rough-cloaked and barefoot, carrying clay jugs that clink with every step. Their faces are mischievous, their laughter already bubbling. You know before they even speak. These are backyard brewers, bringers of rough and unpredictable drink. They slam a jug onto the table, and when the cork pops, the smell nearly knocks you back. It's sour, sharp, halfway between vinegar and horse sweat. They grin proudly, sloshing cloudy liquid into mugs. This isn't the polished ale of monks or the spiced wine of nobles. This is peasant brew, improvised in kitchens and barns, flavoured with whatever herbs grew closest to the door. One jug might taste sweet as honey, the next might taste like ditch water, and both could leave you staggering. You take a cautious sip. At first it's bitter, almost unbearable, then strangely numbing. Your tongue tingles, your throat burns, and within moments a warmth spreads down your arms. You blink. Did the rushes on the floor just sway like grass in the wind? Around you peasants cheer, their own cups draining quickly. Some shout songs, others pound tables. One even begins to dance with a chicken tucked under his arm. Here's the mainstream fact. Most medieval households brewed their own ale, especially in villages. Women, called alewives, were the primary brewers, tending pots over hearths, using barley, oats or rye. Regulations existed, but in practice homebrew was wildly inconsistent. Some batches spoiled in days, others lasted weeks. And yes, people drank it anyway, because water was riskier. The quirky tidbit. Some peasants used hallucinogenic herbs, henbane, nightshade, even hemlock, either by mistake or experiment. Imagine a family thinking they'd brewed hearty ale, only to spend the evening chasing invisible cats across the yard. Records of mad brews pepper medieval court documents, with villagers insisting the devil himself had slipped into the barrel. Historians still argue whether these hallucinatory effects were widespread or rare accidents. Some suggest that poor families, lacking good grain, relied on strange additives to stretch their batches, sometimes courting stronger effects. Others insist such cases were rare, exaggerated by gossip. Either way, the reputation stuck. Peasant brews could make you sick, drunk, or, on the strangest nights, convinced you'd spoken with saints. The tavern fills with their rough songs now. Voices roar, rhythm broken. A man swears his jug makes him stronger, slamming his fist through a thin wall plank to prove it. Another insists he can see his late grandmother sitting in the rafters, smiling proudly. No one dares contradict him. The chicken dancer, meanwhile, has crowned the bird Duke of Ale and parades it around the room. You drink again, bracing yourself. The flavour is still foul, but your head feels lighter, your limbs looser. The fire seems brighter, and shadows crawl across the floor in shapes you're not sure belong to the people casting them. You laugh, unsure whether at the peasants or at yourself. Here's the deeper truth. For peasants, backyard brewing was more than necessity. It was rebellion. It was proof they could carve pleasure from hardship, transform scraps into celebration. Every sip was a small victory against hunger and drudgery. And if sometimes the brew made them see dancing chickens or hear voices in the wind, well, perhaps that only made life more bearable. You set your cup down, wiping froth from your lips. The peasants raise theirs high, shouting blessings and curses in equal measure. The room vibrates with their raw joy, their unpredictable brew coursing through every laugh and stumble. And you, caught up in the madness, realize you've just tasted the wild heart of medieval life. Rough, risky, and unforgettable. The peasants' songs rattle the rafters, their laughter spilling like froth from overturned mugs. You lean back, dizzy, sticky with spilled brew, wondering if your stomach will forgive you tomorrow. Just as the chicken duke is paraded onto a bench for his coronation, the tavern door bangs open again. This time the newcomers are cloaked in velvet and fur, perfumed with spices that cut through the sour smell of peasant ale. Nobles. Their boots are polished, their daggers jewelled, their servants trailing behind with trays laden high. Instantly the room shifts. Peasants fall silent, monks cross themselves, and the air grows thick with tension and awe. The nobles sweep forward, not to join the rabble, but to dominate the feast. They command benches cleared, tables wiped, and from their satchels and trunks they produce bottles and goblets unlike anything the tavern has ever seen. The corks pop, and a wave of aromas floods the hall. Clove, cinnamon, saffron, honey, and something richer. Wine, deep and red as blood, imported from southern vineyards. Servants pour it into the silver cups, and the nobles sip with exaggerated grace. But it doesn't take long before grace gives way to gluttony. Platters of roasted boar, trenchers of bread, wheels of cheese, and candied fruit are brought out, piled high. The nobles gorge themselves, tearing into meat with greasy fingers, chasing each bite with spiced wine so strong it burns. This isn't survival drinking, this is performance. A display of wealth, of power, of a life so distant from peasant hardship that it feels almost otherworldly. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval courts and noble feasts were notorious for excess. Records describe banquets lasting days with dozens of courses, fountains of wine, and elaborate sugar sculptures. Wine was the nobles' drink of choice, imported from France, Italy, or Spain, often spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, or ginger. It was a symbol of status, refinement, and intoxication. Now the quirky tidbit. Some nobles prided themselves on drinking bizarre concoctions, like wine mixed with gold leaf or mead boiled with rose petals. One German duke supposedly insisted on wine warmed with live eels to strengthen the spirit. Imagine being the servant tasked with fishing eels from your lord's goblet, while he slurred poetry about chivalry. Historians still argue whether noble intoxication was viewed as sin or simply expected indulgence. Clerics scolded lords for their gluttony, yet many abbots attended the feast themselves. Some chroniclers describe nobles staggering from tables, vomiting between courses, only to return for more. Was it sacred celebration or decadent sin? The debate continues. Back in the tavern, the contrast couldn't be sharper. The peasants sip their sour home brew, staring wide-eyed at goblets of crimson wine. One noble sneers, raises his cup high, and declares, "This is the drink of kings. What you swill is pig's wash." The peasants bristle, but a servant pours them each a taste, and suddenly the resentment dissolves into sighs of delight. The wine is smooth, sweet, full of warmth that lingers like velvet in the mouth. You drink too, and the effect is immediate. The haze in your head shifts into something dreamier, softer. The lute strings sound richer. The candle flames shimmer with gold. You feel lifted, almost floating. Around you, nobles laugh loudly, voices booming, cheeks flushed. A lady removes her jewelled veil and waves it like a banner. A knight pounds the table, demanding another round. The feast has become frenzy. Soon, restraint vanishes. Nobles shove aside servants, climb onto benches, spill wine onto tapestries. A duke begins declaiming lines of Virgil before forgetting the words and belting out a bawdy song instead. A countess dares a bishop to match her drink for drink, and within an hour he is slumped face first into a silver dish of pears. You laugh, caught up in the madness. The peasants laugh too, emboldened by their shared cups. For this one night the tavern is no longer divided by class. The excess has melted the lines between lord and labourer, saint and sinner. Everyone is red-cheeked, glassy-eyed, singing. And here's the deeper truth. Medieval feasts were not just about food and drink. They were about power and escape. Nobles displayed their wealth, peasants glimpsed luxury, and everyone lost themselves in intoxication. The wine, spiced and potent, blurred hierarchies, dulled resentments, and let people believe, however briefly, that the world was fairer than it was. The night grows late. The nobles collapse into heaps of fur and velvet, their goblets rolling on the floor. The peasants curl beside them, full and drunk, dreaming of lives they'll never live. And you, drifting on a tide of spiced wine, realize you've just tasted not only noble excess, but also the rare intoxication of equality, fleeting, fragile, but real. The tavern is a battlefield of snores by dawn, nobles and peasants alike strewn across benches, their cups rolling among chicken feathers and apple cores. You blink against the smoke-stung light creeping through the shutters, your tongue thick with the sour memory of spiced wine. But before you can slip into sleep, the heavy oak door groans open again. This time the figure entering is neither pilgrim nor peasant, neither sailor nor berserker. He is robed in fine silk embroidered with stars, his beard combed and oiled, his satchel filled with scrolls. An Arab scholar, a traveller from the south, carrying knowledge that will change the future of drink forever. He sets his satchel on the table, pulls forth a glass vessel with coils of copper, and with a smile that's half invitation, half challenge, begins to work. A small brazier is lit, herbs and liquids poured in, and soon steam curls through glass tubes, dripping into a waiting flask. The tavern watches, mouths agape. You lean forward, heart racing, because this is no ale, no mead, no cider. This is distilled spirit, a clarity unknown to most of Europe. Here's the mainstream fact. The process of distillation was developed and refined by Arab and Persian scholars in the medieval Islamic world. Figures like Jabir ibn Hayyan, Geber, and later Avicenna described apparatuses for extracting essences from plants and concentrating alcohol. Their discoveries travelled west through trade, conquest, and scholarship, eventually revolutionising medicine, chemistry, and yes, intoxication. The distilled alcohol they called alcohol, a word that would later become alcohol. The quirky tidbit: early European tasters called this spirit aqua vitae, the water of life, while peasants nicknamed it burning sel. One chronicler tells of a knight who drank 3 cups and declared himself immortal, only to fall off his horse minutes later. You imagine the tavern roaring with laughter at such a tale, though you suspect the knight's bruises were less funny at the time. The scholar hands you a tiny glass. You sip, and fire rips through your throat, sharper than any drink you've known. Your chest burns, your eyes water, your head pounds. And then, clarity. A strange brightness floods your mind, sharper than ale's fuzz or mead's warmth. You feel awake, alive, as if the world has been polished and sharpened into focus. The lute strums again, and suddenly each note is a bell, clear and perfect. The candle flames seem steadier, their halos etched in gold. The tavern murmurs, then erupts in awe. This isn't drink, this is transformation. Some clap, others beg for more. A monk takes a sip and declares it divine, though his hiccup undermines the holiness. A peasant gulps greedily and immediately collapses under the table, snoring before his cup hits the floor. Historians still argue about the early uses of distilled spirits. Were they primarily medicinal, prescribed as tonics and disinfectants? Or were they recreational from the start, passed quietly in taverns long before official records mentioned them? What's clear is that once Europe tasted the water of life, it had never forgot it. The scholar begins to explain, though in a mix of Latin, Arabic, and gesture, that distillation is not just craft, but philosophy. To separate essence from matter, to extract purity from chaos, is to imitate the divine. The tavern listens, enraptured, though half the crowd clearly understands only the part where the liquid makes them feel immortal. Soon the room is thick with laughter, coughs, and wide-eyed declarations. One woman insists she can see through the walls, that the night beyond is woven with silver threads. A man swears he hears angels whispering recipes for new brews. You sip again, your head spinning, and though you see no angels, you do feel a shimmering edge to everything, like the world is vibrating at a frequency only you can hear. The debate rises again: is this miracle or menace? Some insist it's a gift from God, proof of human ingenuity. Others mutter about witchcraft, about alchemists tricking nature. The scholar only smiles, sipping his own glass with serene calm. To him, this is neither miracle nor menace. It's knowledge, and knowledge, once shared, cannot be unlearned. As the flask empties, the tavern shifts once more. Ale, mead, cider. They suddenly seem childish, crude. This spirit, this burning water, is the future. You sense it even through your haze. Europe will drink this fire for centuries to come, shaping wars, economies and lives. Tonight, you've tasted its first flicker, and it leaves your chest blazing. The scholar gathers his scrolls, tucks away his apparatus, and with a nod as graceful as any courtier, slips into the dawn. The tavern watches him go in silence, still clutching their cups, still coughing smoke and fire. You breathe deep, heart hammering, and realise you've just witnessed the birth of a revolution, one that will outlast kings and empires, carved into the memory of every throat it burns. The embers glow low in the hearth, crackling softly, as the tavern dozes in a haze of spirits and smoke. Your stomach churns with the memory of burning water, and just as you think the night cannot possibly hold another surprise, the door slams open. A woman stumbles in, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes wide with fear. Behind her shuffle a ragged cluster of men and women clutching small bottles, vials and dried bundles of herbs. Their voices are frantic, their hands trembling. One thrusts a clay flask forward and cries out, "For protection! Drink, and the plague shall not touch you!" At once the tavern stiffens. Even the drunkest peasants sober a little. The words cut deeper than any knife. The Black Death. You feel a chill spread across your skin, colder than the draught from the open door. Everyone in the room knows the rumours. The pestilence sweeping towns, felling rich and poor alike, leaving streets lined with bodies. Fear itself is intoxicating, and tonight it mingles with the sharp scent of desperate remedies. The flask is passed around, and curiosity pushes it into your hands. The liquid inside is dark, bitter, steeped in herbs so strong the smell makes your eyes water. You sip cautiously. It tastes like vinegar mixed with garlic and something floral, maybe lavender. Your throat burns, but not with the pleasant heat of spirits. This is harsher, acrid, like drinking medicine brewed by a panicked apothecary. Here's the mainstream fact. During the Black Death of the 14th century, people turned to every tonic, potion and herbal brew they could imagine. Vinegar tonics, wine infused with garlic, concoctions of sage and rosemary, all were touted as protection. Apothecaries sold theriac, an ancient blend of dozens of ingredients, once believed to cure snake bites, now repurposed against plague. None of it truly worked, but people clung to these drinks like lifelines. Now the quirky tidbits and recipes for plague protection were so bizarre they sound like jokes. One suggested drinking a mixture of crushed emeralds in wine. Another called for powdered toad stirred into ale. In one town, people smeared themselves with concoctions of pigeon droppings and herbs, swearing it kept the pestilence away. You glance at your cup and hope fervently there are no toads floating at the bottom. Historians still argue whether these tonics offered any real relief, or whether they only gave the illusion of control. Some suggest the alcohol content in spiced wine tonics might have offered minor antiseptic benefits. Others insist it was purely psychological, a way to feel safer in a world crumbling. Either way, the drinks became rituals of survival, swallowed with prayer and fear. The tavern grows tense. People sip, cough, mutter prayers. One man drinks greedily, proclaiming he feels invincible, then promptly vomits into the rushes. Another insists his lungs feel lighter, though his eyes dart nervously. You clutch your stomach, unsure if the warmth spreading through you is protection or poison. And then the visions begin. Whether from herbs, alcohol, or sheer fear, the room feels charged. The smoke from the hearth curls into shapes, figures hooded in black, carrying scythes. You blink, and they vanish. Across the room, a woman gasps, swearing she sees angels standing by the door. Another sobs, certain she hears bells tolling funeral knells. The line between remedy and intoxication blurs into terror. The apothecary who brought the flask mutters incantations, sprinkling herbs onto the fire. Sparks fly green and red, and then the crowd gasps as though witnessing a miracle. Someone falls to their knees, praising God for deliverance. Someone else spits, calling it witchcraft. In the chaos, you drink again. Why, you're not sure. The bitterness grips your throat, your head swims, and for a moment you feel oddly calm. Perhaps this is what the remedies were truly meant for, not to cure disease, but to numb fear. The scholarly debate lingers like smoke. Were these desperate tonics genuine attempts at medicine or thinly veiled comforts, as much psychological as physical? Historians point to how widely they were used, how many believed in their power, even as death spread unchecked. To believe was to survive one more day. The tavern quiets slowly. The woman with the shawl sits trembling by the fire, clutching her empty flask. Around her, men and women slump, their faces pale, their minds caught between hope and dread. You feel the weight of it too, that heavy truth that no drink, no herb, no spirit can stop what's coming. Yet still you cling to the warmth in your chest, fragile as it is. And in that moment you understand sometimes intoxication wasn't about joy or frenzy. Sometimes it was about survival. To drink was to believe, and to believe was the only cure they had. The tavern air hangs heavy with vinegar and garlic fumes, the plague tonic still sour on your tongue. You rub your eyes, trying to shake away the lingering visions of hooded figures in the smoke. Slowly the tension loosens, laughter creeps back, and mugs are filled once more. But the next sound is not laughter. It's the harsh clatter of boots, the rattle of armour, the scrape of steel. Mercenaries. A band of hardened soldiers pushes through the door, their faces scarred, their cloaks tattered, their belts weighed down with daggers and half-empty bottles. The tavern falls silent. Everyone knows these men live on the knife's edge, drunkards, killers, wanderers who sell their blades for coin. And everyone knows they drink not for joy, but for courage. The captain slams a dented helmet onto the table and his men follow, tossing down flasks and tankards. Their laughter is rough, their eyes bloodshot. One thrusts a jug of thin beer toward you. "Drink," he growls, "or fight." You raise it to your lips, and the liquid sloshes weak and watery, a far cry from noble wines or monk-brewed ale. Yet it carries its own power, not in taste, but in ritual. This is the soldier's ration, the cheap beer and sour wine that dulls fear before the march to battle. Here's the mainstream fact: medieval armies relied on alcohol as staple rations. Soldiers were issued daily allowances of beer, ale, or wine, depending on region and supply. These drinks weren't luxuries, they were survival. Beer kept men hydrated, while wine provided calories and killed bacteria. On campaign, soldiers often received a gallon or more per day. The quirky tidbit: some armies deliberately watered down wine not to stretch it, but to keep soldiers just sober enough to march while still dulled enough to obey. Chroniclers tell of commanders furious when men drank too much before a battle, turning their lines into staggering mobs. Imagine being scolded not for cowardice, but for passing out in your armour before the enemy arrived. Historians still argue whether alcohol gave soldiers courage or simply masked their terror. Some suggest it bonded men together, making them fearless as a pack. Others point to disasters where drunken ranks collapsed under pressure. Perhaps both are true. Liquid bravery could make men bold, but it could just as easily undo them. The mercenaries in the tavern drink deep, then slam their mugs down with fists that rattle the table. One pulls a dagger and begins carving into the wood, each stab punctuating a story about raids, plunder, and narrow escapes. His comrades cheer, jeer, and mock him until the story devolves into a brawl. Chairs topple, mugs shatter, and laughter mingles with shouts as blades flash. But just as suddenly as it starts, it stops, because fighting your own before a campaign is bad business. They slump back down, panting, grinning, passing the jug again. You take another sip and the beer tastes flat, lifeless. Yet your head buzzes, your limbs relax, and a strange calm seeps in. You understand now why soldiers clung to this ritual. To face death sober was unbearable. But dulled by beer, the edge of fear softened, the shadows of tomorrow blurred. The captain leans toward you, breath hot with sour wine. "Tomorrow we fight," he mutters. "Tonight we drink." He slams his mug against yours so hard it sloshes onto your lap. You laugh nervously, but deep inside a chill runs through you. These men are marching into chaos, and beer is their only shield against dread. The tavern begins to echo with their songs now, rough, tuneless, half-growled. The lyrics are of battle, blood, and glory, though their voices crack with fatigue. Some slump mid-verse, snoring, others sharpen blades with drunken determination. The line between feast and battlefield has blurred. You feel it too, the weight of steel, the bitterness of beer, the knowledge that tomorrow could be your last. And here's the deepest truth. In mercenary camps across Europe, intoxication wasn't luxury. It was armour of the mind. It was cheaper than steel and sometimes just as necessary. To drink was to forget fear. To drink was to march forward anyway. The captain drains the last drop from his jug and hurls it into the fire, where it shatters in sparks. His men cheer, fists pounding, their eyes gleaming with false courage. You sit among them, mug empty, your chest heavy. For a moment you almost believe the lie. that beer makes men invincible. Then the fire crackles, the life fades, and you're left with the sober truth. Alcohol couldn't stop arrows. But in the minds of mercenaries, it could make them forget they flew. The mercenaries slump where they sit, their daggers still gleaming on the table, their snores vibrating through the smoke-thick air. The tavern smells of sweat, leather, and sour wine, a battlefield without corpses. You sip the dregs of your mug and think you might finally have seen everything the night can offer. But then the door opens once more, and this time it is neither pilgrim nor noble, neither sailor nor berserker. It is a man in a scholar's hood, followed by 2 attendants carrying bundles wrapped in linen. He sets them on the table, unrolls parchment, and lays out jars and powders with the calm precision of a physician. Tonight you are about to taste medicine, or what medieval Europe thought counted as medicine. The physician pours wine into a pewter cup, then sprinkles in a fine powder ground from dried poppies. He stirs it with a silver spoon, muttering Latin under his breath. Another jar opens, releasing the sharp scent of mandrake root. A third reveals shavings of henbane. He mixes them with a steady hand, though his brow creases, as if even he knows he's playing dice with God. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval medicine leaned heavily on narcotics and herbs that blurred the line between healing and intoxication. Opium, henbane, and mandrake were common anesthetics, administered before surgery or to ease unbearable pain. Recipes survive in texts like the Antidotarium Nicolai, instructing physicians to mix narcotics with wine, honey, or vinegar. These were the closest things to anesthesia, knocking patients unconscious, though sometimes permanently. The quirky tidbit: some physicians believed mixing too many narcotics could trap the soul outside the body. There are stories of patients who seemed dead after drinking a sleeping draught, only to wake on the funeral pyre. One chronicle tells of a man who rose during his own wake, groggy and furious, demanding another drink. You imagine the shrieks that must have filled that hall. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors knew how dangerous their narcotic mixtures were. Some suggest they carefully measured doses. Others think they guessed wildly, hoping prayer would cover their miscalculations. Whatever the truth, their concoctions left behind a trail of visions, trances, and near-death experiences. The physician gestures toward you, offering his cup. You hesitate. Around you, villagers lean in, curious, fearful. One mercenary stirs awake, mutters, "Poison," then collapses again. Finally, you raise the cup and sip. The wine is bitter, laced with something earthy, heavy. Almost immediately your limbs grow heavy, your breath shallow, your mind light. The room begins to soften at the edges, its sharp corners melting like wax. You blink, and the tavern dissolves. You are floating above the rafters, watching your own body slump on the bench below. The lute player strums, but the sound comes from miles away. The fire burns, but its heat no longer reaches you. Instead, you are suspended in a strange silence, as though hovering between worlds. You feel no pain, no fear, only a weightless calm. Voices murmur around you. Some cry out that you are dead, others insist you are merely asleep. The physician calmly notes your pulse, as if death and sleep are the same to him. Then slowly sensation returns. The fire's heat brushes your skin. The lute plucks grow louder. Your limbs tingle. You gasp, coughing wine, collapsing back into your own body. The room cheers and recoils at once, half in awe, half in terror. The physician nods satisfied. To him this is routine. To you it is revelation. You've glimpsed what medieval patients must have felt, drugged into oblivion, hovering between life and death, praying they woke again. It is not comfort. It is surrender. The scholarly debate rumbles again. Were these narcotics miracles of healing or reckless experiments? Some argue they saved countless lives by easing agony. Others point to deaths, overdoses, and trances mistaken for miracles or demonic possession. The truth lies, as always, somewhere between. A desperate world clinging to whatever scraps of relief it could find. As the physician packs away his jars, the tavern murmurs. Some praise him as a saint. Others spit and call him sorcerer. You wipe your mouth, still tasting bitterness, your body trembling. Tonight you've learned a truth darker than drunkenness. Intoxication was not only for joy, but for survival. Medicine itself was a form of getting high, sometimes to heal, sometimes to harm, always to escape. The fire crackles, the mercenaries snore. The physician leaves, scrolls tucked beneath his arm, and you sit in the smoky silence, wondering whether you've just been cured or cursed. The physician's footsteps fade into the mist outside, leaving the tavern shivering in uneasy quiet. Your head still throbs with the remnants of his draught. The bitter taste clings to your tongue, and your skin hums as though your body hasn't fully returned from that liminal space between sleep and death. You lean forward, elbows on the table, trying to catch your breath, when the tavern door groans open once more. This time, the figure who enters is neither mercenary nor pilgrim nor scholar. She is barefoot, draped in a rough wool cloak, her eyes glazed and shining with a light not born of candles. The villagers murmur and cross themselves. A mystic. She glides inside like a shadow, muttering prayers, her fingers clutching a rosary worn smooth with years of devotion. She doesn't carry the bottles or flasks, no herbs or powders, and yet the air shifts as though she's brought something more potent. Visions. She kneels before the hearth, whispers words you can't quite catch, and then begins to sway. Her voice rises, quivering, singing in Latin, then breaking into sobs, then laughter, then silence so sharp it cuts through every drunken cough. You watch her eyes roll upward, her face contorting, and soon her body shakes with violent tremors. Around you the tavern leans closer, half afraid, half awed. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval mystics, from Hildegard of Bingen to Catherine of Siena, described visions of God, angels and heaven in ways that read today like hallucinatory experiences. Fasting, sleep deprivation and fervent prayer often accompanied these states, creating altered consciousness without a drop of ale or a puff of smoke. Mystics claim to taste divine sweetness, hear celestial choirs, see rivers of fire and light. Whether miracle or brain chemistry, their ecstasy was undeniable. Now the quirky tidbit, Hildegard herself described visions where she saw a fiery light of exceeding brilliance filling her brain, which some scholars today suspect may have been caused by migraines. Imagine an abbess trying to explain her holy ecstasies, while modern doctors nod and whisper, classic aura symptoms. The line between miracle and malady has never been thinner. Historians still argue whether mystical ecstasies were purely spiritual, psychologically induced, or perhaps even chemical. Some point to herbal fasting diets, heavy on spiced wine and bitter tonics that could trigger altered states. Others insist these were authentic experiences of faith. The debate burns like the hearth itself, with no clear flame or ash. The mystic's voice grows louder now. She shouts that she sees angels in the rafters, their wings blazing gold. You glance up, and though the beams are the same blackened timbers as before, you swear the shadows shimmer for a heartbeat. She collapses forward, then springs back, laughing, crying, trembling. She declares that Christ himself has touched her lips, that she tastes honey on her tongue, though she has eaten nothing for days. The tavern is spellbound. Some fall to their knees, begging her to pray for them. Others scoff, whispering that she's mad, possessed, or faking for coin. A monk mutters a psalm under his breath, while the mercenaries watch with glassy eyes, unmoved, their flasks clutched like talismans. You, caught in the swirl, feel torn. Part of you wants to dismiss it as delirium, the kind that comes from starvation and exhaustion. Another part feels something tugging at your chest, a strange sweetness in your own throat, as though her vision ripples outward into you. For a moment you close your eyes, and you too hear faint voices singing, not from the lute, not from the villagers, but from somewhere beyond. You open your eyes quickly, heart pounding, unsure if you imagined it. The mystic finally collapses against the hearth, her body trembling with exhaustion. A woman rushes to cover her with a cloak, murmuring prayers. The tavern exhales as though waking from a dream. Was it real? Was it madness? Was it the residue of smoke and ale in your veins? The truth may never be known. But here's the deepest truth. For medieval people, ecstasy and intoxication were cousins. Both lifted the soul out of the ordinary. Both blurred the line between body and spirit. Whether through herbs, drink, or prayer, the desire was the same. To see beyond the world of mud and stone, to touch something eternal. You lean back, trembling, the mystic's cries still echoing in your ears. Around you the tavern murmurs, some scoffing, some weeping, some quietly shaken. You sip your ale, though it tastes flat after her vision, and in that dim hall you realise you've just witnessed intoxication of a different kind. Not brewed in barrels or distilled in glass, but drawn from the human soul itself. The mystic lies still by the fire, her cloak drawn around her like a cocoon, and the tavern exhales in a long, uneasy sigh. The peasants return to their cups, the mercenaries slump against the wall, The pilgrims murmur prayers into their holy flasks. You think the night has finally calmed when a sudden clang of a tankard snaps every head toward the centre of the room. A man has slammed his mug down, ale foaming over the rim, his face flushed crimson. Another man across the table shouts back, and soon voices rise, chairs scrape, fists pound. The alehouse has become not a chapel, not a court, not a feast, but something stranger. It has become a courtroom, a parliament, a place where drunken justice is decided over mugs. The quarrel escalates quickly. One man swears the other cheated him in a dice game, while the other insists the dice were blessed by St. Nicholas himself. You watch the tavern erupt into sides, half the room jeering for one, half for the other. The innkeeper sighs, wipes his hands on his apron, and bangs a ladle against a pot. "We'll settle it here," he shouts, and just like that, the alehouse is transformed into a hall of law. Here's the mainstream fact. Taverns in the Middle Ages were not only places to drink, but also places of business and rough justice. Many disputes, especially among peasants and townsfolk, were settled informally in alehouses before ever reaching manorial courts. Witnesses were often just whoever happened to be drinking nearby. The alehouse was both public square and judge's bench. Now the quirky tidbit, some towns even recorded official alehouse courts. In one English village, a man was fined for throwing beer in another's face after accusing him of stealing chickens. The judgment? He had to buy everyone in the tavern another round. Imagine paying damages not in coin but in ale, while the whole room cheers your humiliation. Historians still argue whether tavern justice was respected or ridiculed. Some believe it was a vital community tool, keeping minor disputes from clogging formal courts. Others say it was chaos, drunken shouting mistaken for law. Tonight, in this smoky room, it feels like both. The two men square off, mugs in hand. The judge, a red-nosed reeve, demands silence and declares that the accused must drink 3 full cups without falling over to prove his innocence. The crowd roars approval. The man gulps the first, slams the second, staggers on the third, then collapses to the floor in a heap. The tavern howls. Guilty. Yet justice doesn't end there. The loser must crawl to the fire, kiss the ash, and buy another round for the room. He does so, groaning while the victor struts, crowing like a rooster. For a moment the tension eases, replaced by laughter and fresh mugs. You realise the punishment is not humiliation alone. It is also more drinking, more money for the innkeeper, more merriment for the crowd. You sip your ale and wonder at the absurdity. Here, law is as fluid as froth, justice as wobbly as a drunk's legs. Yet in its own way, it works. Grievances are vented, tempers cooled, enemies turned into drinking partners again by the bottom of the mug. Then another case erupts. A woman accuses her neighbour of stealing her bread. He denies it, swearing on St. Cuthbert's bones. The tavern judge rules. They must arm wrestle, loser buys the next jug. The neighbour wins, though his elbow slips suspiciously on spilled cider. The woman curses, the room roars, and the ale flows again. You laugh, shaking your head. This is justice not by parchment and seal, but by sloshed performance, a ritual of ale and argument. The scholarly debate lingers. Was this chaos a threat to order, or a hidden strength of medieval life? Some scholars argue it bound communities tighter, giving everyone a voice. Others see it as drunken folly. But as mugs clink and grudges dissolve, you suspect the truth. Tavern justice may not have been fair, but it was effective enough. The night rolls on, disputes rise and fall, accusations shouted, sentences handed down in pints and penalties. The room grows louder, merrier, more united. Even the mercenaries chuckle, tossing coins for another round. You take a deep breath, inhaling smoke, malt sweat and laughter. And here's the deeper truth. In the medieval alehouse, intoxication wasn't only escape. It was glue. It held communities together, resolved quarrels, turned violence into farce. The law of the tavern was written not on parchment but in spilled ale. And for one chaotic night it kept the world spinning. You raise your mug, toast the reeve, and join the chorus. Drunken justice may wobble, but it stands. The reeve slumps back against the bench, satisfied with his rough judgments. The crowd laughs, the quarrel's forgotten, and the tavern seems to breathe again. But the night isn't over. Outside, bells toll faintly. Midnight. And with them comes a new noise. Fiddles, drums, tambourines. The door bursts open, and a caravan of performers floods in, trailing banners and cages of squawking birds, their cloaks bright with dyed cloth, their faces painted with flour and soot. Travelling fair folk, jugglers and herb sellers. The tavern erupts into cheers. because when the fair arrives it brings not only spectacle but strange brews, powders and potions that blur the line between entertainment and intoxication. They spread their wares across the tables. Jars of candied nuts, vials of coloured powders, bundles of dried plants tied with string. A juggler flips knives while balancing a cup on his head. A fire-breather gulps something foul-smelling and spits a plume that scorches the rafters, leaving the crowd roaring. And in the corner an old woman shakes out a pouch of herbs, claiming it will make you dance until dawn, or drop you dead if misused. No one doubts her. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval fairs were more than markets. They were annual eruptions of commerce, play and intoxication. Brewers, herbalists and entertainers sold concoctions both familiar and strange. Spiced wines, honey cakes and draughts of dubious origin. For peasants who lived in narrow circles, the fair was a window into another world. Now the quirky tidbit, some travelling peddlers sold powders they called laughter dust, likely dried herbs like valerian, or even powdered mandrake. Tossed into drinks, it made crowds giggle uncontrollably. One chronicler describes an entire village rolling in the mud after sharing such a potion at a May fair. Imagine the scene, men and women howling with laughter while sheep wander through utterly confused. Historians still argue whether these powders and potions were genuinely psychoactive or simply exaggerated by gossip. Some likely had mild sedative or stimulant effects. Others were pure theatre, coloured sugar passed off as fairy crystals. But in the context of fire, music and festivity, even a pinch of spice could feel like sorcery. The tavern transforms into a carnival. A man buys a vial, sprinkles it into his cider, and within minutes he's leaping onto the table, dancing like a rooster while the jugglers cheer him on. Another woman drinks a syrup of poppy and honey, then slumps into blissful sleep on the bench, a smile on her face as though she's dreaming of paradise. The performers clap and shout, selling more to eager hands. You sip cautiously from a mug tinted red with their powder. It fizzes faintly, smells of rose petals and smoke. The taste is strange, sweet at first, then bitter, then cloying. Your tongue tingles and the room brightens. Drums pound louder, fiddles soar higher, and the fire seems to pulse with every beat. You blink, and for a moment the juggler's knives leave trails of light in the air, glowing arcs that linger like stars. The crowd is swept up in frenzy. People shout, clap, stomp, dance. Children grab handfuls of candied seeds, their laughter rising. Even the mercenaries stir, grinning as they toss coins at the performers, demanding more tricks. The line between tavern and fair dissolves. This is no longer a room of wood and smoke, but a kaleidoscope of motion, fire and sound. Someone beside you swears they see tiny sprites hopping between mugs. Another insists the powder gave him strength, lifting a bench with two men still sitting on it. You laugh, unsure if it's true or if intoxication has simply made everyone believe anything is possible. Here's the deeper truth. Medieval fairs offered more than distraction. They were laboratories of intoxication, places where ordinary people could taste the extraordinary, whether through herbs, spice, or sheer spectacle. The performers didn't just sell potions, they sold transformation. For a coin you could be a king, a fool, a lover, or a dreamer. The fiddles quicken, the fire breather spits again, and sparks rain down. You feel your body lifted by rhythm, your mind loosened by powder, your heart welling with laughter that won't stop. The tavern is gone. For one dizzy, dazzling moment, you are in the heart of a medieval fair, intoxicated not only by drink but by wonder itself. The fair folk collapse into laughter, their powders sold, their tricks performed, their purses fat with coins. Slowly the tavern returns to its smoky rhythm until the door creaks again and a silence ripples through the crowd. This time it isn't peasants, pilgrims or jugglers who enter. It is men cloaked in velvet, hoods drawn low with rings glittering on their fingers and servants at their heels. They move with secrecy, their eyes darting, their steps hushed. These are not performers. These are nobles, merchants and scholars who do not want to be seen. The crowd whispers. Secret societies have arrived, and they bring with them pipes, smokes and intoxicants from caravans that few in Europe have even heard of. They carry carved boxes from the east, polished wood inlaid with ivory. When the lids are opened, a rich, unfamiliar scent spills out, sweet, sharp, resinous. Pipes are packed, coals set glowing, and soon the air fills with blue smoke that curls like ribbons. It is not the smoke of the hearth or tallow candles. It is smoother, sweeter, almost perfumed. The room hushes as the first noble exhales a long plume, his eyes half closed, his lips smiling faintly as though he has just glimpsed paradise. Here's the mainstream fact. By the late Middle Ages, trade routes were carrying not only spices but also exotic smokes and resins from the east, incense, hashish and other stimulants. While tobacco wouldn't arrive in Europe until after Columbus, there is evidence that pipes and imported cannabis products were sampled by elites through Arab intermediaries. These were luxuries, kept behind closed doors, never spilled openly into the tavern world of peasants. Now the quirky tidbit, some secret societies, whether real or rumoured, were said to use pipes in their rituals, claiming the smoke allowed them to commune with angels, demons or distant stars. Chroniclers whispered of night meetings where nobles puffed strange herbs, then declared visions of golden cities, winged beasts or apocalyptic fire. One story even tells of a duke who insisted the smoke revealed to him how to win at dice, though he promptly lost his fortune anyway. Historians still argue whether these tales were truth or slander. Were the elites truly experimenting with exotic smokes, or were their rivals accusing them of indulgence to undermine their reputation? The debate lingers, like the smoke itself, impossible to pin down. The noble nearest you passes the pipe. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. You inhale tentatively. The smoke is warm, sweet, heavy, clinging to your tongue and throat. Almost immediately your head grows light, your body slack. The tavern blurs. The lute strings sound deeper, vibrating through your bones. The fire seems to expand, its flames blooming into shapes, arches, spires, towers of light. You blink and they dissolve, but the sensation lingers. You are somewhere else, lifted beyond smoke and stone. The nobles murmur softly, their voices hushed, reverent. One insists he sees the Virgin Mary walking across the hearth flames. Another declares he feels himself flying above the tavern, soaring over cities lit with lanterns. The servants, watching nervously, pour more wine, though their hands tremble. You exhale slowly, watching the smoke twist. For a heartbeat you swear it forms faces, smiling, frowning, watching. You laugh nervously, but part of you wonders if the pipe has indeed opened a door. The scholarly debate deepens. Some argue these experiences were simply indulgence, a pastime of elites who could afford luxuries. Others suggest they were genuine attempts at mystical exploration, blending imported herbs with rituals of secrecy. Whatever the truth, in this tavern tonight, the line between ritual and revelry has vanished. The nobles lean closer, whispering of brotherhoods and hidden knowledge. They speak of stars guiding fate, of visions that predict wars, of angels warning of plagues. Their eyes gleam with intoxication, but also with conviction. For them, this smoke is not mere pleasure, it is revelation. And here's the deepest truth. In medieval Europe, secrecy itself was intoxicating. To belong to a hidden circle, to taste what others could not, to share visions forbidden by priests, that was a high greater than any herb. The pipe was not only a vessel for smoke, it was a key to belonging, to exclusivity, to power. You pass the pipe back, your hands trembling, your heart racing. The nobles nod as though you've joined their circle, as though you now share their secret. The smoke swirls, the tavern spins, and for one dizzy moment you believe you are part of something vast and hidden, a brotherhood carried on clouds. The nobles fade into their blue haze, their whispers trailing into the rafters, and the tavern exhales once more. But before the smoke clears, a new wave of noise breaks through the night. Laughter, shouting, the stomp of boots, and the clatter of books. The door bursts open, and in tumble a group of young men, their robes half undone, ink stains on their fingers, scrolls tucked under their belts. Students, not peasants, not monks, but scholars in training from the nearest university, flushed with youth and mischief. Their hair is wild, their Latin slurred, their eyes bright with the kind of madness that comes from too many hours copying text by candlelight and too many mugs emptied in one go. They sprawl across benches, shoving peasants aside, demanding ale, wine, and anything else the tavern can provide. One waves a parchment overhead and declares it proof of Aristotle's theory that beer is the fountain of wisdom. Another climbs onto the table and recites Cicero, except every line ends with a belch. The crowd roars with laughter, because these young men, though destined to be priests, lawyers and officials, are for tonight little more than drunken jesters. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval universities from Paris to Bologna to Oxford were notorious for their rowdy students. Records overflow with complaints about fights, drunken riots, and tavern brawls. City officials often begged kings or bishops to rein them in. The term town and gown conflict was born from these clashes, students versus townsfolk, often ending in bloodshed. Sometimes sparked by nothing more than that spilled wine. Now the quirky tidbit, some universities actually banned students from taverns, threatening expulsion, yet tavern owners often made their living off student customers, so they quietly welcomed them anyway. One Oxford chronicle tells of a brawl that began when a student complained his wine was sour. The fight escalated into 3 days of rioting, dozens dead, the king himself intervening. Imagine a food review on Yelp so bad it sparks a civil war. Historians still argue whether these students were truly scholars seeking wisdom or rich brats wasting their father's coin. Perhaps both. What is certain is that their drunken antics became part of university life itself, a rite of passage as essential as lectures. Back in the tavern, the students order a barrel rolled in. They tap it themselves, froth spraying over their robes. They drink in rounds, chanting songs in Latin, then bawdy verses in the local tongue. Their laughter is infectious, their energy overwhelming. Soon they're arm wrestling with peasants, debating theology with monks, even trying to teach mercenaries to conjugate verbs. The mercenaries mostly grunt, then demand another jug. You sip from their barrel and the ale is stronger than most, brewed by town brewers who know students will pay for potency. Your head spins faster, your tongue loosens, and before you know it you're shouting half-remembered Latin phrases too, laughing when they come out garbled. One student insists that too much ale reveals divine truth, then promptly falls backward off his bench. Another argues drunkenness is the quickest path to philosophy because it strips away pretense, though his toga is soiled enough to disprove the dignity. A third simply howls at the moon through the tavern window until the innkeeper hurls a loaf at his head. Here's the deeper truth. These students are not only drinking to escape, they're drinking to belong, to form bonds that will shape their lives and careers. Tonight's drunken laughter may become tomorrow's alliances in courtrooms and churches. Intoxication is their initiation, their way of testing limits and forging loyalties. As dawn creeps near, the students collapse in heaps of parchment and robes, their scrolls stained with wine, their minds buzzing with half-formed ideas. Some will wake tomorrow as priests, others as lawyers, some as nothing at all. But tonight, they are united, intoxicated not only by drink but by youth, freedom, and the illusion that the world is theirs. You slump with them, your own head swimming, and realise that in this medieval night, every class, every age, every soul has found its way to intoxication. And the story is still far from done. The students are sprawled across benches like broken quills, their robes stained with ale, their scrolls crumpled underfoot. You shake your head, dizzy from their barrel brew, when a new sound cuts through the snores and mutters, a drum beat. Heavy, steady low, like the tramp of boots. The door creaks open, and a knot of townsfolk storms in. Bakers, smiths, millers, their faces set, their fists clenched, their voices loud with drink and anger. They're not here for merriment. They're here for rebellion. The crowd swells around them, whispers spreading. Someone's been overtaxed. Someone's landlord demanded too much. Someone's lord sent another soldier to seize grain. And tonight, ale has loosened tongues and stiffened spines. The tavern becomes a council hall of fury, every mug raised not in laughter but in protest. Here's the mainstream fact. Many medieval uprisings were sparked in taverns. From the English peasants' revolt of 1381 to smaller local riots, alehouses were incubators of rebellion. Taxes, rents, corruption, all discussed over mugs until the grievances boiled over. Chroniclers often blamed taverns for stirring unrest, calling them dens of sedition. Now the quirky tidbit, one 15th century report from Kent describes rebels meeting in an alehouse, disguising their plans as ale-drinking clubs. They even gave their revolt the cheerful nickname the Great Rumour. Imagine plotting treason under the pretense of a beer festival. It worked, until the sheriff realised that any festival lasting 6 days straight probably wasn't just about ale. Historians still argue whether alcohol caused rebellion or merely amplified existing anger. Some suggest drunkenness gave peasants courage to speak forbidden words. Others argue that sober or not, they were already desperate. The ale was just the spark that lit the powder keg. Back in the tavern, the townsfolk pound the tables. A blacksmith declares he'll no longer pay taxes to a lord who drinks gold while we drink mud. The miller shouts that he'll burn the manor granary to the ground. Their words are loud, bold, reckless, and yet the ale makes them sound almost reasonable. The peasants cheer, mugs slamming, froth spraying like sparks. You sip cautiously, the beer sour but strong. It warms your chest, and soon you feel the same fire in your veins. Your tongue itches to join the shouts, your hands clench around the mug. The room shakes with fury, laughter, defiance. Someone carves a crude slogan into the table with a dagger. No ale for lords, no grain for thieves. The reeve, red-nosed and swaying, tries to calm the room, muttering that rebellion means death. But the crowd drowns him out with chants. Freedom, they roar. Bread and ale for all. The words are sloppy, drunken, half forgotten by morning. But in this moment they ring like prophecy. You look around and realise how fragile authority really is. One barrel too many, one insult too sharp, one hungry winter, and a tavern can turn into a revolution's cradle. You see it now, rebellion doesn't start with swords, it starts with mugs. The chant rises, louder, faster, the walls trembling. Someone throws a stool, another lights a torch, and for a terrifying moment you think the tavern itself will explode into riot. But then the torch sputters, the stool breaks, and the crowd collapses into laughter. The tension drains, replaced by another round of mugs. Tonight, the revolution ends in spilled ale and slurred promises. Tomorrow, who knows? And here's the deepest truth. Intoxication gave medieval people more than escape. It gave them courage, even if temporary. It gave them voices, even if slurred. It gave them visions of freedom, even if forgotten by dawn. Without alehouses, many rebellions might never have been spoken into being. You finish your mug, your throat raw, your chest burning with both drink and fear. Around you, the would-be rebels slump against walls, already half asleep, their chants fading into snores. Yet you know the truth. Though this night ended in laughter, others would not. Drunken dreams could become bloody mornings, and the tavern, always, was the spark. The chants of rebellion fade into snores, mugs abandon like broken weapons on the tables. You rest your head in your hands, the wood sticky with ale and sweat, when a new rhythm rises from outside, creaking rigging, gulls crying, the slap of waves against wood. The tavern door bursts wide, and in stomp a band of sailors, their cloaks heavy with salt, their boots dripping seawater. Their eyes are bloodshot, their beards tangled, their voices booming with the sea's roar. They carry barrels on their shoulders, not of ale or wine, but something fiercer. Rum's early ancestors, the fiery spirits born of distillation experiments on the high seas. They thump the barrels onto the floor, pry them open, and the smell hits you like a storm, sharp, sweet, pungent, almost medicinal. The sailors cheer, ladling the liquid into mugs. They call it by a dozen names. Kill Devil, Navy Fire, Burning Sugar. Whatever the name, it's new, it's strong, and it rocks the tavern harder than any wave. You sip cautiously. The liquid burns your throat, then blossoms in your chest, hotter than aquavitae, harsher than wine. Your eyes water, your stomach flips, your head spins. But then, warmth. A deep pounding warmth that spreads through your body like a tide. No ale or mead has ever hit so fast. No wonder sailors swear by it. Here's the mainstream fact. Though rum in its modern form wouldn't dominate until the 17th century, experiments with sugarcane distillates began earlier, especially as Europeans expanded trade with the Mediterranean and Africa. Distilled spirits of various types trickled into ports, and sailors, always thirsty, were quick to embrace them. These fiery brews offered more than hydration. They offered courage against storms and fear alike. Now the quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes tested new spirits by pouring a little on gunpowder. If the powder still ignited, the liquor was deemed proof, too weak, and it was dismissed as waterlogged swill, too strong, and the crew risked blindness. Imagine men huddled on a deck, lighting fuses beside barrels of explosive liquor, laughing madly as sparks flew. Historians still argue whether these early rum-like spirits were common in medieval Europe or more of a fringe curiosity. Some suggest they remained luxuries in port cities, sampled in secret by the merchants and sailors. Others believe rough versions circulated widely, their recipes whispered between crews. The truth is blurred like the tavern air after a fresh round. The sailors drink deeply, slamming mugs against the table, their voices rising in song. They sing of storms and sirens, of captains cruel and seas endless. Their chorus is rough, bawdy, but hypnotic. The rum sharpens their edges, makes their eyes gleam. One leaps onto the table, balancing precariously, swaying with an invisible ship. Another seizes a frying pan and bangs it like a drum while the crowd stomps in rhythm. You drink again, and the tavern tilts. The floor seems to roll, the ceiling sway. You hear gulls cawing, though the only birds here are half-plucked hens in the kitchen. The smell of salt fills your nose, and suddenly you're on a ship. Waves crashing, sails snapping, wind tearing at your cloak. The sailor's song becomes the sea's roar, and your body rocks with phantom swells. You laugh, dizzy, gripping the bench as though it were a mast. One sailor, grinning with missing teeth, hands you a ladle of the spirit and dares you to drink it all. You try, gag, cough, and feel the fire scorch your lungs. The crowd roars approval. He claps you on the back so hard you nearly topple. "Good," he bellows. "Now you'll never fear a storm again." You're not convinced, but your spinning head almost believes. Here's the deeper truth. For sailors, rum and its cousins weren't only for merriment, they were anchors against terror, against endless seas and sudden storms. A mug of fiery spirit steadied shaking hands, dulled the dread of drowning, and forged bonds among men who might die together tomorrow. Rum wasn't escape, it was survival, just as surely as rope or sail. The sailors sing louder, stomping until the floorboards groan. Their fire spreads to the crowd, and soon peasants, nobles, even mercenaries join the chorus. The tavern heaves like a ship at sea, every body rocking, every voice booming. The walls shake, the mugs slosh, the air throbs with salt and spirit. And you, swept into the storm, realize that you've just drunk not only a sailor's brew, but a sailor's world, fierce, fiery, perilous, intoxicating. The sea lives in your blood now, burning and wild. The sailors' storm song fades, their bodies slumped against barrels, their rum fire dimming into snores. The tavern is thick with the smell of salt, sweat and smoke, the floor sticky with spilled spirits. You rub your eyes, thinking, surely nothing stranger could walk through the door now. But then, faint at first, a rhythm rises from outside. Not boots or drums this time, but bells. Soft, chiming, uneven. The door creaks, and in step figures cloaked in white, hoods pulled low, crosses swinging onto chains. Flagellants. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes fever bright, their bodies scarred by the whips. They carry no barrels, no mugs, no pipes. Their intoxication comes not from drink, but from pain, rhythm, and faith. The crowd hushes, shrinking back as the flagellants march in a slow circle, chanting hymns that shake the rafters. Their voices are raw, cracked, yet powerful. They whip their own backs with leather cords tipped in iron, blood splattering onto the rushes. Each lash seems to draw them deeper into trance. Their eyes glaze, their lips tremble, and some collapse in ecstasy, moaning prayers. You feel a chill race through you. This is intoxication, but of a darker kind, born of suffering, not sweetness. Here's the mainstream fact. During the Black Death and other crises, groups of flagellants roamed Europe, whipping themselves in ritual penitence. They believed their pain would appease God, cleanse sin and spare them from plague. Their processions often drew crowds, inspiring awe and fear alike. Chroniclers describe them collapsing into trances, some claiming visions of angels, others crying out warnings of apocalypse. Now the quirky tidbit, in some towns, flagellants were said to bleed directly into wine casks, believing the mixture became holy. One chronicler sneered that peasants drank it eagerly, as if Christ himself had blessed the barrel. You grimace, imagining the metallic tang of blood mixed with sour wine, but also understand the desperation that made such rituals believable. Historians still argue whether flagellant visions were genuine religious ecstasy, or the delirium of exhaustion, blood loss, and fasting. Some point to descriptions of heavenly choirs heard by participants, others to seizures mistaken for divine revelation. Either way, the intensity of their altered state is undeniable. The leader of the group steps forward, his back raw with fresh welts, his eyes blazing. He shouts that he sees the Virgin in the flames, warning of judgment. His followers wail and whip harder, their chants spiralling into a frenzy. The tavern crowd shifts uneasily, torn between awe and disgust. A mercenary mutters, "Madmen," but his voice is drowned by the hymns. You sip what's left of your ale, but the taste turns sour in your mouth. The sight of blood dripping onto the rushes makes your stomach churn. Yet you cannot look away. The flagellant's rhythm pulls at you, steady, relentless. You feel your pulse sinking with the whip cracks, your breath quickening, your mind lightening. For a moment, you imagine you too are lashed, your skin burning, your spirit soaring. A strange calm floods you. Pain as purification, suffering as transcendence. The flagellants collapse in a heap, their bodies trembling, their voices hoarse. The leader raises a bloody hand, blessing the room. Some villagers weep, others spit. The tavern is left in silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the drip of blood into straw. Here's the deeper truth. Intoxication is not always joy. Sometimes it is frenzy, sometimes torment, sometimes a desperate grasp for meaning in a world drowning in death. The flagellant's ecstasy is as real as the monk's beer or the sailor's rum, just sharper, darker, etched in flesh instead of foam. You shiver, wiping sweat from your brow. The smell of iron clings to the air, heavy as chains. Around you drinkers shift uneasily, mugs forgotten. You clutch yours anyway, grateful for its dull warmth. Tonight you've seen intoxication in its most brutal form. Faith turned to frenzy, blood turned to vision. Pain turned to a high that no drink could match. The flagellant's blood still drips into the rushes when the door creaks yet again. By now, you almost laugh. Who else could possibly appear in this night of endless arrivals? But the figure that steps inside silences even your weary thoughts. Cloaked in black, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing the face, a long-beaked mask curving outward like some monstrous bird. A plague doctor. The tavern recoils, whispers hissing through the smoky air. Children whimper, women cross themselves, and even the mercenaries fall quiet. The mask is stuffed with herbs, rosemary, juniper, cloves, allspice, and the smell rolls through the room like a strange tide, pungent, sharp, almost intoxicating. The doctor moves slowly, deliberately, placing a satchel on the table. From within, glass vials clink, each filled with liquids the colour of jewels, green, amber, crimson. He does not drink, but he pours, offering remedies. The crowd hesitates, torn between fear and fascination. One brave peasant takes a vial, sniffs it, then coughs violently as the fumes singe his nose. The doctor nods as if that reaction is proof enough. Here's the mainstream fact. Plague doctors stuffed their masks with aromatic herbs, believing they filtered disease. They carried potions of vinegar, spiced wines, and herbal infusions, prescribing them as tonics to ward off illness. Though ineffective against the plague itself, these brews offered psychological comfort, and sometimes, through their alcohol content, brief relief. Now the quirky tidbit. Some recipes recommended drinking wine infused with crushed pearls or powdered emeralds as a sure defence. Imagine peasants pawning everything they owned to buy a draught of what was essentially expensive grit in sour wine. Chroniclers mock such practices, but desperation drove people to swallow anything, even ground-up jewels. Historians still argue whether plague doctors were healers, charlatans, or scapegoats. Some say they genuinely believed in their remedies. Others claim they profited from fear, selling wine at 10 times its value. Either way, their vials became part of the intoxication of survival, drinking not to forget but to feel protected. The doctor offers you a small glass of ruby liquid. You sip, and your tongue burns with cloves and vinegar. It is bitter, medicinal, but beneath it lurks the warmth of strong wine. Within moments, your chest feels lighter, your head buzzing. Perhaps it is only the alcohol, but you almost believe the air around you is cleaner, safer. The tavern breathes easier, mugs refilled with the doctor's concoctions. People mutter that the plague will never touch them now. Others cough nervously, gripping their cups tighter. One man drinks 3 in quick succession and declares he sees angels perched on the rafters, sprinkling holy water down upon the crowd. Laughter erupts, though a few nod solemnly, believing it. You sip again, and the smoke seems thinner, the fire brighter, the night less heavy. The mask looms before you, its glass eyes blank, its beak stuffed with herbs. For a heartbeat, you feel as though you're staring at death itself. Then the doctor turns away, packing his vials, leaving behind only the sharp scent of rosemary and the faint warmth of spiced wine in your blood. Here's the deeper truth. Plague doctors offered not cures but comfort. Their tonics were placebo wrapped in ritual, their fumes a shield of belief. To drink from their vials was to declare you still had hope, still had power in a world ruled by disease. And sometimes, hope itself was the strongest intoxicant. The door closes behind the beaked figure, and the tavern exhales in relief. You clutch your glass, the taste of cloves lingering, and realise you've just swallowed not only wine, but also faith. The tavern is heavy now with silence, broken mugs and bodies slumped in sleep. The flagellants are gone, The plague doctor vanished into the mist. The nobles and peasants alike sprawled in sticky heaps. Only the embers glow, throwing faint light across rushes soaked in ale and blood. You sit back, your chest warm, your head buzzing, your mind reeling from all the visions, brews and fumes that have swept through this night. You've seen beer blessed by monks, mead sweet with honey, cider foaming wild, spices that blurred the world, poppies that dulled pain, mushrooms that conjured fairies and flagellants who sought their high in lash and blood. You've tasted the burning water of scholars, the fiery spirit of sailors, the bitter tonics of plague and the ecstatic trances of mystics. And now, at last, the tavern begins to settle into stillness. Around you, snores echo like soft drums. A lute lies abandoned in a puddle of ale. The chicken duke's feathers drift lazily across the floor. Somewhere, a mercenary mumbles in his sleep, hand still gripping the hilt of his dagger. A noble coughs, then burps, then resumes his dream of Virgil's poetry. The mystic twitches by the fire, lips moving in prayers only she can hear. The room has become a graveyard of intoxication, each soul lost in their own private world. You close your eyes and lean against the bench, letting the haze wash over you. For the first time tonight, you are not pulled forward by a new arrival, a new brew, a new vision. You are left with only the echoes, the weight of it all pressing gently on your shoulders. Here's the mainstream fact. Intoxication in the Middle Ages was not a side story. It was woven into daily life, from the ale that replaced unsafe water to the wine that symbolised nobility, from the narcotic draughts of physicians to the ecstatic trances of mystics. Every class, every faith, every corner of society was touched by it. Now the quirky tidbit, one 14th century monk wrote that in heaven, the angels drank wine without hangover, beer without bloat, and mead without madness. It was a half joke, a half prayer, scratched in the margins of his psalter. You smile at the thought. An eternal tavern with no headaches, no vomit, no regrets. Historians still argue whether medieval intoxication was about escape, survival, or revelation. Perhaps it was all three. And as you sit in the smoky silence, you realise that to be human in that world was to reach for something beyond mud and pain, even if that something came from a mug, a vial, or a whip slash. Your head grows heavier, your breath slower. The tavern fades. The embers dim. The snores merge into a lullaby. And in that stillness you finally let go. And now, as the last embers crumble to ash, the tavern falls utterly still. The doors are closed, the mugs empty, the laughter and chants and hymns long gone. Only the soft rhythm of breathing remains, a room of dreamers drifting on currents of ale, wine, herbs and visions. The air is warm, heavy with the residue of smoke and spice, yet it feels softer now, like a blanket settling over weary shoulders. You shift slightly, stretching your legs, and notice how the shadows no longer dance, they rest. The rafters no longer ripple, they are steady beams again, quiet guardians of sleep. Even the floor, sticky and uneven, seems forgiving, as though it has accepted the night's chaos and is ready to hold you gently until dawn. Your body grows heavier, every muscle loosening as though the very weight of centuries has slipped away. The roar of sailors, the chants of flagellants, the whispers of mystics, all of it fades into a hum, distant, harmless, almost tender. Whatever fear or frenzy those moments carried has dissolved, leaving only the soft residue of stories, like footprints slowly washed smooth by the tailor. You close your eyes, letting the warmth seep deeper. Imagine the tavern's roof opening into the night sky, the stars above glowing faintly steady and kind. Imagine the hush of fields outside, the quiet lapping of water in barrels, the gentle creak of wood settling into rest. Everything slows, even your thoughts, even your breath. And so you let the night cradle you, not in wild visions, not in fevered chants, but in simple calm. A calm that promises tomorrow, that promises continuity, that promises dreams without burden. The story is done. The night is quiet, sleep comes,